Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's 1 o'clock on the dot. I just wanted to call this committee of the whole meeting to order, September the 21st at 1. And first thing I'll do is do a roll call. Councillor Foster. I don't see Councillor Foster yet. Councillor Van Leeuwen. He's here. Councillor McElwain. He's here. Councillor Kittredge.
Present.
Is here. Councillor Dunsmore is not here. He did inform me that he might be a few minutes late. He is in the middle of his walk, but he is going to be joining us. So I haven't heard anything from Councillor Foster. So when they do join, if you guys see them and I don't see them, just let me know and we'll make sure that they have an opportunity to disclose any pecuniary interest at that time. Councillor McCrae?
Present.
And Councillor McCrae is here. Okay. Second thing on the agenda, any disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to section 3, the Tier 3 water study presentation. And I see that we have some guests from the GRCA here. Welcome, Martin. And if there's anybody else on calls, welcome to you as well. And at this point, I will turn things over to Kyle Davis, our risk management official. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Mayor Linton, members of council, thank you very much for the opportunity to present an update to you on the Tier 3. Martin Keller is going to kick off the update, and then I'll fill in some details on the policies. And Sonja Strynatka, who's also a member of the project team and on your agenda, was unable to attend today, but she sends her regrets. I'll let Martin start the presentation.
Thank you, Cal, and thank you, Mayor and councillors. Just one technical glitch. I've been asked to share my screen, but apparently the host disabled participants' screen sharing, so I can't do that right now.
Martin, can Kyle do that for you?
Maybe.
I can try.
Well, give it a shot, Kyle. If not, then we'll go to plan B, but I think you should be able to share the screen.
That looks like it.
Oh, perfect.
There we go.
Okay, so let's go to the start of the presentation for you, Martin.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, sorry for that.
Can you see that okay?
Yeah, now it's good. So I can, maybe I'll just let you know when you can pass to the next slide. You can kind of advance it for me, please, Kyle. Okay, so this is an update to Wellington Council. We will have a similar update to Mapleton Council tomorrow. Next slide. So we're talking about the Wellington Tier 3 study, and we're now moving into county policies. So here you can see the different components of the Tier 3 study. As you will be well aware, the study started quite a while ago, and we've kind of completed all the technical work for this Tier 3 project. And we're now in the policy development. If you can click, you can see, we'll be able to see an orange circle coming around. So we're really in the policy development stage now. And we're starting to move into a different phase of the project. Next slide. So what we've just recently done is we've had an update to the community liaison group that was on September 2nd. And this is essentially a shortened version of the community update, the update that we gave to the CLG. We are transitioning from having completed the technical work and now moving on to source protection policy development, and those draft policies will be presented later on by Kyle. We are now moving into a kind of what we call a Section 34 plan update. This is a regulatory process that is led by the Lake Erie Source Protection Committee, and essentially it's the piece of the work that needs to be done to update the source protection plan to be submitted to the province and then for their approval. That's always it's a mechanism that we have, Source Protection Committee has, when there's new information coming available, for example, new wells or new technical studies, or in this case, technical studies and policies. We'll get into that a little more closely later on when we conclude. But essentially, the process from here on in is we're going to the committee October 1. We'll have a pre-consultation in the fall by the end of this year with municipalities and also ministries, and then it'll include a council resolution, and then we'll have a public consultation period in the new year with the submission in the spring expected. Next slide. So a little bit of background, just to kind of give you a snapshot of what we've done and where we come from and where we are right now. Next slide. Can you advance, Kyle? Yes, thank you. So this is essentially the kind of snapshot of what we have done in kind of a visual of all the work that has been going on for the last 4 years with respect to the Tier 3 study. We have a map, we have a line on the map, we have a wellhead protection area quantity, and we have a significant risk level that mandates us to develop policies. And as a note, we're using the water supply master plan pumping rate to delineate that wellhead protection area quantity, and it's the average annual demand of 9,060 cubic meters a day that was used. Next slide. So here's basically a summary of the results. The technical work looked at the various different scenarios as has been presented to you before. And here's the threat analysis results. Really looking at what is driving that risk. We have this significant risk level, but we need to understand what is driving that risk. And as you can see here, the largest influence is coming from increased municipal pumping to meet future population growth. Unserviced domestic water well pumping, land development, existing permitted non-municipal takings, and existing livestock watering. So many of the existing other areas and other scenarios that we've run showed that those sectors have minimal impact. The exception that the note that should make is under 4 is that if we have an increased or new large groundwater taking non-municipal, that may affect groundwater levels at the municipal wells. Depending on the location, depending on the pumping rate, you'll see later on that's where some of the policies will address that, to make sure that those areas and those once or when those things are being applied for permitted to take water, for example, that those increased takings or new takings would be assessed. Next slide. Here's a summary of the key findings. So taking those key technical insights that we just shown on the last slide, taking that forward into policy. That's what we've done in terms of looking at where do we need to focus, what is driving the risk, where do the policies need to focus on. So the implications for policy development is that we really need to focus on managing and optimizing the municipal water takings. And then obviously a lot of insight from the water supply master plan. So decreasing future demand, so that's water conservation, demand management, that side of the coin essentially, and then also looking at increasing future supply. Looking at optimizing, redeveloping existing wells, and also looking at new supplies. We do need, as I just mentioned before, make sure that potential interference with municipal wells from new or expanded non-municipal takings are looked at and assessed. So that's a clear focus of the policies as well. We want to maintain recharge. It's not a big driver of the risk, but we want to maintain recharge to support the existing water budget, and has also other benefits for water quality and ecological functions in the area. We want to make sure that the model can be used as an asset. It's a tool that we use now. We want to make sure it's maintained, so we still have it for later on, and we can update and reuse it as a tool. We want to make sure that we have monitoring programs in place, so we can continue, maintain, and enhance potentially the information we're gathering, so the tools, the models, and the information gets enhanced, and we can make better decisions with better information. And then lastly, through the climate change assessment that was done, at this time, with the kind of assessment that we did with the 2050 time horizon, we don't see any climate change risks predicted to the quantity of municipal groundwater supply. And it's largely an effect of increased temperatures in the winter, more precipitation as rain, less frosted ground, so more recharge, so essentially more water available. Next slide. And I think that's moving over to you, Kyle. Thanks a lot. Oh, and I should be doing that actually. Oh, it doesn't matter which. Yeah. Okay, I will continue to the next couple of slides, and then we'll hand over. So quick policy approaches to just look at the next steps of what we need to do. So under the Clean Water Act, we need to look at those two prescribed drinking water threats: consumptive water taking, so not returning the water to the same source, in this case the same aquifer, and also looking at activities that reduce groundwater recharge. So those are the two items, the two activities that we need to address through the policies. Again, as a reminder, the policies will apply within Water Protection Area Q and not outside. And they will look at existing and future water taking. So we can look at what's happening right now, but we can also look forward into the future and making sure that those things are addressed, as well as for activities that reduce groundwater recharge. Those are only for future. Roads, parking lots, development. We're not looking at necessarily reassessing what's already there. Now, with respect to how we've done that in the past and how we're doing it in this project as well, is that the Source Protection Committee delegated policy development to the project team, including the municipal chapter leads. Well, later on, Kyle will explain and highlight that there are different municipal chapters with different policies inside them. So what happens in the next stage is the project team will recommend draft policies to the Source Protection Committee. That has happened at the draft stage already in June, and now with revised policies will happen for the next committee meeting on October 1. So those revised policies will be presented to the committee, and then the committee will start with pre-consultation. Next slide. Here's the map of the Center Wellington Water Protection Area quantity, and you'll see a little bit of a different take on it. It's got the municipal boundaries here, specifically with Woolwich in the region of Waterloo. The majority of the Center Wellington WAPQ is covered by policies in the Wellington County chapter. That also includes Mapleton, but it's all in the county. There is a small portion that extends into Woolwich in the southwest, and those policies will be covered by the region of Waterloo chapter. Next slide. And that's now the switch over to Kyle. Thanks.
Thanks, Martin. So I will now walk you through the draft water quantity policies, and in your agenda package there was a staff report from the Lake Erie Resource Protection Committee on June 25th. That includes the draft policies at that point in time, June 25th. We are working on making some updates to those policies based on some feedback we've received from the Community Liaison Group. We also had a legal review done over the summer, and of course any feedback that we get through the council meetings as well. So when this comes back to you in a few months, the policies may look a little different than what's in your package today. So I just wanted to flag that for you. So the draft policies can be grouped into three major themes. And those three major themes are outlined on the slide there for you. The first theme is management through existing provincial instruments. So this is permits to take water, Aggregate Resource Act approvals, environmental compliance approvals. The second theme is growth and development and land use planning. So there's a suite of policies that address growth and development, as well as planning policies for both the water consumptive T19 threat and the recharge reduction T20 threat. And then the last theme, and I'll be honest, is a bit of a catch-all, municipal water management. So there are some important policies in here. Municipal system optimization is a key one. Water conservation measures is another one. But it's a bit of a catch-all because it also includes the education policies, as well as some of the monitoring policies and the information sharing policies. And all of these policies have been developed with consideration to the policy considerations that we presented last time to council, which I know was a few months ago. So some of those considerations are the technical results that Martin just went over in about 2 or 3 slides ago. But some of the other considerations that we did have to consider when we were developing policies was precedent within the county chapter, and also precedent within neighboring source protection plans. That could be the Credit Valley, could be other plans in the province, and then also directions from the Ministry of Environment. So all that went in to kind of our decisions and our recommendations on the types of policies that you see in front of you today. So the entire policy framework, talking about the second and third bullet now, are designed to work in tandem with each other in an adaptive management framework. And adaptive management, quite simply, is a feedback cycle where you're collecting data, you're having management tools to evaluate your progress, and then you're making changes based on those results. Adaptive management is often used in resource management, but it's also used a little bit closer to home, and you can see that in the drinking water quality management system, the QMS, or any continuous improvement program that a manufacturing company may use. So we've used the same type of philosophy or cycle with the policies here. So you'll see as we get into them, we have monitoring policies that will then feed into the prescribed instrument policies that will then also tie into the land use policies. And then there's also an opportunity, which we'll talk about in the last couple slides, to update these as time goes on. So the first theme is prescribed instruments, provincial instruments, and this is Permits to Take Water, Aggregate Resource Act approvals, and environmental compliance approvals. So this is where the ministry direction really kind of comes through. So we were given some clear direction from the ministry that management through existing provincial instruments is preferred, and that is to achieve an overall act goal of not duplicating regulatory processes. So in this case, this is one of the main policy approaches then that we are using to address, especially the consumptive water taking threat. So this is directions in the policies to the ministries on terms and conditions for the permits to take water. And these are legally binding policies. Nowhere else in the policy framework can we tell the ministry they have to do something. In the prescribed instrument policies, we are able to direct the ministry that they do need to make changes to review their permits to take water and then make recommendations on those terms and conditions. So there's additional policies in addition to those prescribed instrument policies, and there's 2 for permits to take water, there's 2 for Aggregate Resources Act, and that's because they're split between current and future. And then there's 2 for environmental compliance approvals, which is on the recharge side. There's also additional policies that are aimed to kind of strengthen the relationship between the planning process in the municipalities and the ministries. And then also the provincial water quantity framework, which I was last in front of council to present back in July, also, in our opinion, supports the implementation of these proposed policies. The next theme is growth and development. So in the growth and development, there is earlier and stronger contemplation of water supply considerations in provincial growth forecast, and in municipal development, and in allocation of growth in the county. Now, some of these policies shall consider things of that nature. So they're not as strict as maybe some of the comments that we've received from the community liaison group would like to see, but they're kind of where we're at and what we're able to provide at this time. There's also planning policies around new development, and there's a new definition inserted on major development to maintain. So that's for new development to maintain existing groundwater recharge rates. A lot of that work's already going on through the planning and development process, but this is to further strengthen the good work that's already happening. And there's also increased study requirements being added to the official plan for any new developments taking greater than 50,000 liters of water, as well as increased coordination, and I mentioned this on the prescribed instrument slide, between the municipalities and the province, between the planning process and the permit to take water process. Because sometimes you get into a bit of a chicken and egg scenario with that. And there's also some proposed changes to definitions and reporting requirements to strengthen some existing county OP requirements, specifically around the drinking water threat disclosure report, developing a terms of reference for that, as well as a few other items. Municipal water management. So as promised, this has got a number of different types of policies in it, but overall the theme is the management of municipal supply. So the very first first bullet there is one of them is a very key one, especially given the results of the technical work, which identified that the municipal takings are one of the largest takings and one of the largest drivers to the risk. So this is municipal optimization strategies for the municipal system. And also incorporating the Tier 3 study results into the Class EAs that, as you know, are going to be coming as we look for new well supplies. Reinforcing and strengthening municipal water conservation programs, building on the recommendations and supporting the recommendations from the Water Supply Master Plan. There was a lot of detailed recommendations there on the Water Supply Master Plan about that. So the Tier 3 is really looking to that document to kind of lead the water conservation program. Increased maintenance of groundwater and surface water monitoring to support future updates. So this is one of the examples of the adaptive management that I was talking about. So collecting new data that then can feed into policy revisions at a future date. And also another part of the adaptive management is sharing that data and increased information sharing between the local water managers. And this is us at the municipal level, it's also the province, and it's also the conservation authority. We all have a role to play, and we're looking to kind of strengthen those relationships in a bit of a more formal way. There's also a few policies in here around funding. Again, this is a spot where we can't tell the province what to do. We're asking the province to consider additional funding for future updates of the Tier 3 model. We have updates to municipal design standards. Again, a lot of this work is already in there, but it's just go through it with the source water lens and maybe make some tweaks to strengthen what's already there. And then education and outreach. So education, outreach, and monitoring are important policies because this is how we are addressing the threats, the consumptive water taking threats or the recharge reduction threats that don't fall in under the other policies, whether that be a permit to take water, so maybe it's a domestic well, maybe it's a industrial taking that's less than 50,000 liters, or maybe that they're exempted like livestock. So the education, outreach, and the monitoring are how we address those threats, because legally we do need to address all the whole range of threats. So the next few slides are just walking you through why there are no Part 4 prohibitions. So as you're aware, I've presented to Council previously in regards to kind of my role as risk management official and my inspector. We enforce Part 4 of the Clean Water Act, which has prohibitions and risk management plans. And these are tools that we consider using for consumptive water. However, once we finish the analysis, we've decided at this point not to propose policies along those lines. So we'll talk about prohibition first. Prohibition is very clearly, we're providing very clear direction. Actually, the regulation reference is on the slide there for you from the province regarding looking at all other options before we consider prohibition. So we have a requirement right there to make sure that we're only using it as a tool of last resort. So we look at then precedent within the County of Wellington chapters. So water quality policies, so these are policies on fuel storage, chemical storage, manure application. We've limited prohibition to 100 meters around the well only. So we've not applied it in a larger area. And when we consider kind of using that approach for water quantity, that approach has kind of a negligible effect on protecting municipal supply, because you could, in effect, put a well at 105 meters or 110 meters away, and it would still have still show an impact to the municipal well. Another factor in not using prohibition was this fourth bullet, and it's a bit of a mouthful. Hydrogeologic complexity and model uncertainties provide limited support for prohibition of water takings in specific areas. So what that means is, and I talked to hydrogeologists about this, you can kind of look at it as a weather forecast. So the weather forecast for Elora and Fergus will tell you that there's a chance or even a likelihood of rain or precipitation in Elora and Fergus. But it won't tell you exactly when the rain's going to fall at your house, or exactly how much rain you're going to get at your house. So the Tier 3 model is similar. It's going to give you an overall regional picture, but to really apply it at a site-specific level, you really do need to update the model and put more site-specific information. Just like in terms of the weather example, you might put a rain gauge at your house. So that's sort of the analogy I like to use for this. And then also talking about the provincial water quantity framework. Talking about the provincial water quantity framework. There's priority of use and increased municipal participation as kind of main goals within that water quantity framework, which I think also supports not using prohibition. So Then why didn't we use risk management plans, which is not prohibition. It's basically developing a plan, a legal document with the company. So this goes back to the technical results then. The largest driver of risk are the water takers greater than 50,000 liters. And those takers are generally subject to permits to take water. There are some exceptions, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the majority of them are subject to permits to take water, including our own takings, municipal takings. There's also additional draft policies that aim to strengthen that relationship between the ministry and municipalities in the permit to take water review and approval process. And then for aggregate operations, there's also policies that target the use of the approvals under the Agri Resources Act. So they may need a permit to take water and an ARA approval. And then to address the municipal threat, because if you recall, municipalities actually rank very high in terms of the driver of the risk. There's the municipal system optimization and the water conservation policies that are directed, that are legally binding on the municipality. So no RMP was needed in those regards. We then kind of break it down into the water takings that are either less than 50,000, so we don't need a permit to take water, or they're subject to the exemption. And one of the main exemption subjects of that would be livestock. The technical work again showed that those takings weren't really driving the risk. So these could be small domestic takings, private wells, or they could be livestock takings. We looked at both in the modeling. They weren't really driving the risk, so we didn't feel at this time an RMP policy was necessary. Going forward, we felt the land use planning policies provide an extra layer of protection and study for future water takings. And it did flag, of course, that the Tier 3 modeling showed that a future non-municipal taking could pose a risk, which is why we had the permit to take water policies in place and those other planning policies. On the recharge, threat 20 side, that was not considered a large driver of risk either, so no RMP was necessary there in our estimation. And that we were dealing with it through the environmental compliance approval, land use planning, education, and municipal design standards for the recharge. So those first two bullets are about consumptive water taking, and the last two bullets are really about the recharge threats. So overall, our conclusion is that the water taking and recharge reduction threats can be addressed appropriately through the policy approaches other than Part 4 at this time. However, I like to point out that this is an adaptive management process that allows us to reassess when new information becomes available. So not only is it an adaptive management process as we implement the policies, it's also an adaptive management process, this Section 34 process that Martin talks about. And this is within the larger clean water framework that allows us to update the chapter. And this is I think the third update that we've done in the last few years on the Wellington chapter, second and third, that allows us to update the chapter as new information becomes available. And there's a feedback loop there through the annual reporting, which we report to council, but we also report to the GRCA and the province. And now I'll let Martin finish up the last two slides. And thank you very much for your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Kyle. Yes, a couple of slides just to finish off and look a little bit into the next steps. So timeline right now in terms of what's happening next, and you can see the arrow at the bottom here. We're kind of starting to, or we have started, and we're going into that Section 34 update process. So we're at the end of the summer. We've presented to the community liaison group. Next step will be source collection committee. We'll then have those revised policies in front of them. October, November will be pre-consultation. In early 2021, we will have a public consultation period. And in the spring, we'll have those comments come back to the committee, and then we'll have a submission probably sometime end of April, early May. Next slide. In terms of the actual next steps, so we will and have obviously received policy revisions and comments from both the CLG, we will hopefully from councils, from the ministry, internal discussions, internal legal review. So all those comments, all those discussions will feed into the revised policies that the project team will recommend going to the committee next week, October 1. Once the committee is okay with it, we obviously hope that that will happen. If accepted, the pre-consultation notice will be sent out to clerks the following Monday. It'll be October 5, I believe. And we'll start with the pre-consultation process. As mentioned before, there'll be a request for council resolutions in support of those amendments. And then all that information comes back. Any comments from the pre-consultation process will go back to the committee again in January. Following that, we'll have we'll have a public consultation process. So there are further opportunities for input. Obviously, through the resolution, in terms of reviews and having considerations for submitting that resolution to us, and then also as part of the public consultation process later on. Between January and March, there'll be an extended public consultation period. As I mentioned, there'll be comments come back to the committee, and then in spring, summer, around April, May, there will be a submission to the province for their approval. All those processes and dates, all the information will be available through our webpage, sourcewater.ca. So there will be all the dates will be there for people to look at. And with that, I think in the appendix you have received the actual policies. With that, both Kyle and I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you very much, Kyle. Very detailed update for us. So appreciate that a lot. Appreciate all the good work that is being done by GRCA on this in combination with Center Wellington and other folks in the community. Appreciate that. Questions from council on this report? Councilor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I have 3 questions for Kyle. So my first question would be, would the criteria of greater than 50,000 liters of water be an accumulated total of an existing entity's water taking? For example, if a business entity had 2 wells on their property that individually were each below the 50,000 liters per day criteria, would you look at the combined total of water taking or individually the water taking?
Thank you, Councilor. Thank you, Councilor McCray. Through you, Mayor Linton, and I'll let Martin jump in as well if need be. So it's a provincial process. It's a Ministry of Environment process. My understanding is that they do look at the combined taking of the property. So it would be the combined taking for both of those wells. Martin, is that your understanding?
That's my understanding as well. But yes, it's the provincial process, so this is regulated through the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks.
Okay, thank you. My second question would be related to the appendix, item number 3, number 19, that states placeholder for new consumptive policy related to priority of use or allocation to be considered once province releases water quantity framework related to water bottle moratorium and provincial water management review. Could you please explain what that statement is implying?
Absolutely, Councilor McCray, through you, Mayor Linton. So the version that you have in front of you was presented to the Source Text Committee on June 25th, which was prior to the province releasing the water quantity framework. So we had been drafting a prioritization policy, which would have been a policy asking the province to basically put prioritization of use in the water quantity framework. We pulled it prior to June 25th because we were aware that the province was going to be releasing the water quantity framework. So we put the placeholder in instead. We've provided comments through Wellington Source Water as well as through the township on that framework. And my recommendation probably is that placeholder gets removed at this point because the province has is proposing to address it through the water quantity framework, the prioritization use. So that was the thought process. We were in the process of writing it, and things were changing sort of underneath our feet as we were submitting. So that would be that would be something I think at this point we would remove because the province has addressed that through the water quantity framework.
Okay, thank you. And my final question is that although a municipality can rely on both its water supply master plan and the Tier 3 studies to assess water taking activity, why is a municipality's water supply master plan not included as part of the studies used to assess development, industrial, commercial, or aggregate water taking? Tier 3 studies only assess water quantity, whereas a water supply master plan considers quality and quantity. The challenge is ensuring sufficient water fit to drink. We have several gravel pits in the vicinity of a couple of proposed new wells and an existing well.
Yeah, thank you again, Councilor McRae, through you, Mayor Linton. Yeah, that's a good point, and that's some good feedback. So I believe you're speaking specifically about policy T19A and B, which are regards to the permits to take water. So we certainly could add that wording into that policy. So there's a statement that says it's implied right now. It says should ensure the use of the Tier 3 model reports and data in its evaluation of these takings, including consideration of water supply requirements for planned growth and prolonged drought. So that last clause implies what you're talking about. But I agree. I think we could absolutely put a specific reference to the water supply master plan in there, similar to what we've done in the monitoring policies, where we've listed off the Class EA and the water supply master plan. So that's great feedback. Thank you. And we can make that change and propose that to the province.
I just think if one's arguing with somebody, it's better not to have it implied. It's better that it's spelled out, just to be safe.
I agree. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor McRae. Councilor McLean?
Thanks, Kelly. I had a question, Kyle. One of the under growth and development, you mentioned the stronger contemplation of water supply in provincial growth forecasting. And given that our growth forecasts have been public since 2006 and continue to expand, I think now to 2051, is there a correlation between that and our water protection program through the provincial government? If not, is there a way that we as a municipality can impact that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor McElwain. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I am, of course, aware that the new growth forecast has come out recently to 2051. So the policy that we've got written, I believe you're talking about G, where the county, in consultation with municipalities, take into consideration water quantity constraints when allocating projected growth as part of the municipal comprehensive review. So that's something that's directed at the county level. So that's something that the county and the municipalities can certainly weigh in on in those discussions. I think the higher level side of it that you're asking about with the province, we can only go so much so far in the policies. So kind of the next step would be then municipal officials talking to provincial officials. So that's, I think, with the policies we can only recommend to the province on these kind of matters. We can't dictate. So that's what's reflected in what we have written.
Follow up, Kelly, if I could.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilor McLean.
I guess just to follow up with that, Kyle, the comment earlier, stronger contemplation of water supply considerations, is that by the province or is that by the committee, or who is implementing these earlier, stronger contemplation efforts?
For sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the main implementation for that would be in policy G through the county, through the allocation of the growth forecasts. So that would be county and the municipalities. So that would be the main implementing body on that. I'm looking to see if we also had something directed to the province just right now. That's why I'm kind of looking off my screen from you. So that K is directed to the province. So this is to ensure the provision and distribution of municipal water supply to support county population growth and forecasts. So this is directed to the Ministry of Environment when they are evaluating permits to take water, and specifically municipal permits to take water in regards to new or expanded municipal takings that could actually provide more water and help and affect the risk level. So there are two policies there that kind of get to the points that you're asking about. The main growth one is directed to the county and the townships, really with the county as the lead, and then kind of the related policy around new and expanded municipal takings is directed to the Ministry of Environment. However, that one is a should consider or shall consider. It's a non-legally binding one to them. Martin, is there anything you'd like to add to that? discussion with other municipalities, other parts of the plan?
Thank you, Kyle. I can add that I'm just thinking about some of the other plans. Some of them approved in other regions of the province, but they've been obviously done quite a while earlier. Previously, there have been policies put in place to ask, again, as Kyle mentioned, it's a recommendation that the province, and it would be Municipal Affairs and Housing, consider water supply, considerations, Tier 3 studies, and so forth in their determination of having those growth forecasts developed. From what I understand, they're well aware of those Tier 3 studies. They're well aware of the ministry is well aware of those issues and those technical components and the information. But we can certainly go back and look at whether there's anything else that we should include in policies in terms of what the province can do.
Great, thanks very much, Kyle and Martin. Any other questions from council? Council Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess this is a question for Kyle. It's in the report. It mentions agricultural water takings, but it just says livestock. Does that include all agricultural, let's say irrigation for greenhouses and crops? They would be exempt?
Thank you for the question, Councilor Kittrus, through you, Mr. Mayor. So livestock irrigation, crop irrigation or greenhouse irrigation actually requires a permit to take water. So they would actually be caught under the permit to take water policy. Whereas livestock, the exemption under the regulation is for sustaining of life. So it's for livestock watering. So the livestock side of it does not require permit to take water. So when we did that model run, that model analysis, we were looking at livestock, not irrigation, because the feeling was that if there was irrigation or greenhouses that were greater than 50,000 liters, they should have a permit to take water and would have shown up in the permit to take water data that we reviewed.
Councilor Kittrus, follow on?
In the policy recommendations, it has in section 19, I think it's A and B, it has groundwater and surface monitoring. Is that just for the urban areas or extensive throughout Center Wellington?
Certainly. Thank you for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. In A and B, the reference to groundwater and surface water monitoring would be specific. Would be a specific term and condition for the province to add to the permit to take water. So that would actually be site specific on whatever that taking is. Could be a municipal taking, could be an industrial taking, could be an agricultural irrigation taking. The more broader monitoring policy is actually just above that in T19 and 20A. So T19 and 20A, where it talks about the Township of Center Wellington developing and maintaining and implementing a long-term monitoring program in conjunction with other agencies. That particular monitoring is broader. Currently, our monitoring network is fairly urban based because that's where our wells are. However, it is definitely possible and probably probable that network is going to expand into the more rural areas as our municipal wells expand into the more rural areas. So the kind of broader scale monitoring would be covered more under policy T1920A, whereas the more site-specific monitoring around an individual permit to take water are covered in T19A and B.
Follow up?
Thanks for that, Kyle. Follow-up, Councilor Kittrus?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. From what you've just said, and you're qualifying that probable is the So are you saying that for rural residents that they will eventually be monitoring on their wells required in the future? And who would who would be required to have that cost for that?
Yeah, not through you, Mr. Mayor. Not necessarily, Councillor Kittredge. The monitoring that I was talking about would be more, and when I said probable, I was talking more about the township-owned monitoring well network.
Okay.
So that's what I was talking about, and that probably being extended into the rural areas as our municipal well locations extend out into the rural areas. That being said, private well monitoring is almost always part of permit to take water application processes, and can sometimes be long-term monitoring, part of long-term monitoring programs too. So it is possible that some residents, with their agreement, of course, could have their private well monitored by the township as part, or by another applicant, an industrial or commercial applicant, as part of their permit to take water process or long-term monitoring. But I was referring more to the township-owned monitoring network.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else from council on this one? Okay, thanks again, Martin. Thanks again, Kyle. There's no action that has to be taken from council. This is for information. So thanks for coming, and thanks for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to move on to confirmation of the agenda. But before that, I know that Councillors Foster and Councillor Dunsmore came in a little later, so I just wanted to make sure that there is no pecuniary interest with anything on the agenda here. You're good, Councillor Dunsmore, Councillor Foster, you're good? Okay. All right, just wanted to cross that off. Moving on to a recommendation for the agenda that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington confirm the agenda for the meeting held September 21st, 2020. Moved by Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McLean. All in favor? And that's carried. No delegations today. So the first report that we have, 6.1, is the appointment of a community emergency management coordinator. And I know that Linda's had a lot of work over the last few months, and I think she's done with it. So she's going to turn things over to a new emergency management coordinator. So there's a report there that our Manager of Legislative Services and Municipal Clerk put together here, and to appoint Ronya Malgar as the Emergency Management Program Coordinator. So any questions from council before we move ahead with this recommendation? Okay, so I read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington authorize the Mayor and Clerk to execute a bylaw to appoint Ronya Malgar as the Emergency Management Program Coordinator, CEMC, for the Township of Center Wellington. Mover for that, Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor McCrae. Any questions? All in favor? And that's carried. Welcome, Haronia. 6.2, amendment to the procedural bylaw to permit participation electronically in meetings and beyond. And there's a report there that our clerk put together. Perry, do you want to speak to this?
Through you, Mayor Litton, I think the report is pretty self-explanatory. It will allow us to continue to hold our committee and council meetings as well as advisory committee meetings electronically into the future until such time as it's safe for us to have the meetings again in person.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Any questions from council on this one? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of questions. First of all, Carrie, I'm not clear why this is needed right now. I know we have not yet rescinded our emergency powers delegation. We passed this to meet electronically under emergency, under the context of emergency powers delegation. Why then would we have to switch this now when we have not yet changed that?
Through you, Mayor Linton, Bill 197 was passed, allowing municipalities to continue beyond the provincial state of emergency to hold meetings electronically, provided they passed an amendment to the procedural bylaw. We originally passed an amendment to our procedural bylaw, allowing us during the state of emergency to do it. This will take us beyond that in the event that we lift our emergency.
So the reason that we're doing it is because provincial legislation has changed. Correct? We had to do the same. We had to do the same thing at county because of the legislation changed. Councillor Foster, Colin?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, follow up. I note that we're going to be dealing with our procedural bylaw in about a month's time, and this is really a procedural bylaw. And I'd like to make a motion that we defer this until October 21st, when we're actually dealing with the procedural bylaw as well. In my view, the two need to go hand in hand together. And I'd like to see what's proposed for our new procedural bylaw before we consider this electronic meeting bylaw. So I'm making a motion to defer this and deal with it in October, when we're having the procedural bylaw discussion.
Yeah, the problem with that, Councillor Foster, is then we can't do this meeting. We can't, because of the provincial legislation, we had to do this at the beginning of our meeting, or else we can't hold this meeting. So if we don't pass this...
What has changed? What has changed, Kelly? We've been meeting for 6 months like this. Why now?
Councillor Foster, please don't interrupt me. What's changed, as I mentioned before, and as our clerk has mentioned, is provincial legislation. So the provincial legislation changed when they ended their emergency, so that all municipalities, all 444 municipalities across the province, have to put this in place before they can meet electronically. So this has to be put in place for us to do today's meeting. After, we are going to be doing our procedural bylaw and looking at it in more detail, but we needed to put this in place today. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory why this is on the agenda as the first item. Any other questions from council? Councillor Van Luyk?
Thanks, you through your Mayor. I can understand why we need to put this in place, and it makes sense because we need to do this meeting, and if it's expired, therefore. I do look forward that we can come up with some good solutions to meeting in person again in the council chambers, whether that's putting up some little plastic barriers or whatever it needs to be. I think that we should be able to accommodate everybody somehow to get back into that council chambers. So I hope we're going to continue to brainstorm on that, different ways to accommodate everyone to get them there. Thanks.
Yes, Councillor Van Luyk, we will. I'll be reaching out to all the councillors again to talk about October and November. That being the case, if there is a requirement for some people to still call in or still go in versus Zoom, we still need to put this in place, so that allows them to do that. But yeah, I'll be reaching out to the councillors to see what we do moving forward. Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question about, if we pass this right now, does this mean that outside of the emergency, if someone is on holidays or out of the country, they can electronically go into the meeting and they could be anywhere in the world, and so therefore be in the meeting? Isn't part of the whole process that you have to be in person? I mean, I understand that we're in this, we haven't figured out the corona thing, but wouldn't that be a procedure that would allow for that then, by passing this?
Yeah, I'll let the clerk answer that one.
Through you, Mayor Linton, the way we have written it now, it would not, because we currently do not have the technology to allow us to do that. But in the event that we are able to implement the technology to allow some members to be electronic and some members to be in person, then we would change the wording slightly, and that would allow us to have a hybrid. But right now, we currently do not have the technology to pull that off.
Anything else from council on this one? Okay, I'll read the recommendation. That the Council of the Township of Center Wellington authorizes the mayor and clerk to execute a bylaw to amend bylaw 2002-91 as amended, a bylaw to provide rules governing the proceedings and conduct of the meetings of the Council for the Township of Center Wellington, to allow for electronic participation in meetings beyond an emergency and for members participating electronically to count towards quorum. Can I have a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McElwain. All in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Moving on to 6.3, Federation of Canadian Municipalities Asset Management Grant Application, and I'll turn it over to our Managing Director of Corporate Services and Treasurer, Dan. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Mayor Linton. This report is in regards to an opportunity to apply for a grant through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. As council is aware, we have a capital project shown in the draft 2021 capital budget for a roads needs study in the amount of $50,000. In addition, council had already approved staff moving forward with a rural needs roads needs study at an upset limit of $20,000 earlier in an earlier council meeting. The FCM grant is for asset management purposes. It allows municipalities to progress their asset management practices with projects 80% funded through FCM to a maximum of $50,000. We are proposing that we submit an application for both the urban and rural portion of this road needs study. That it will be done by the township in 2021. Total combined expected cost of around $70,000, meaning that 50,000 coming from a grant, 20,000 coming from township capital reserves. So this is a necessary resolution that is required to submit the grant application to FCM.
Thank you, Dan. Questions from council? Okay, I will read the recommendation of the Council of the Township of Center Wellington directs township staff to apply for a grant opportunity from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Municipal Asset Management Program for corporate asset management development in Center Wellington, and that the Township of Center Wellington commits to conducting the following activities in its proposed project submitted to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Municipal Asset Management Program to advance its asset management program. Complete a roads needs study for urban and rural roads, including condition assessments, and that the Township of Center Wellington commits $20,000 from its budget towards the cost of this initiative. Mover for that recommendation? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McElwain. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much, Dan. Moving on to 6.4, Aggregate Resources Wellington County Report from Dan Wilson, Managing Director. Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This is actually a report from the county through Ken DeHart, the county treasurer. The county does assist the township with what we call assessment-based management, which is helping us maintain and protect and enhance our assessment role for tax purposes. So the county is currently looking at tax assessment for gravel pits, aggregate resources. They have filed appeals for the assessment of these gravel pits in the more southern municipalities in Wellington County at this point. The issue is around how these gravel pits are assessed from a tax perspective. In a lot of cases, gravel pits are paying less tax than single-family homes or small businesses within the community. They are assessed pretty much a farmland class 5 classification. Just so council is aware, there are six farmland classifications, class 1 through 6. Class 1 being a higher productive farmland to class 6, which is least productive farmland. So in a lot of cases, gravel pits are assessed at class 5 farmland, which results in a lot less taxation being paid by gravel pits and a subsidization of costs being paid by residents and other businesses as a result. So the county has been working with this group called Top Aggregate Producing Municipalities of Ontario, and they have endorsed a resolution that is attached to their report. It's a fairly lengthy resolution, but in summary, they do not consider that the criteria used for assessing aggregates to be a fair methodology. They believe that this needs to be reviewed, and they call upon the province to work with the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation to address this assessment issue for aggregate resources. So the county has sent this report and the resolution to all the lower tiers within Wellington County, asking for all of us to endorse the resolution. So that is the request at this point.
Thank you very much, Dan. And I know Councillor McAway knows a lot about this file. The county's moving fairly aggressively in cooperation with TAPMO to try to suggest some pretty substantial changes to the way MPAC assesses aggregate operations because they aren't paying their fair share of taxes, and they haven't been for a lot of years. You will be seeing more communication, public communication that's going out from Wellington County and their partnership with TAPMO. I think a lot of it will be under the TAPMO banner, but Wellington County is very involved in this. We've met with the Ministry of Finance several occasions already, most recently meeting with the minister at AMO and his parliamentary assistant. So this is going ahead, and I'll make sure that we keep Center Wellington Council appraised of what's going on all the time, but we do think it's in our best interest to have all the member municipalities sign off on the resolution that the county is moving ahead with. So that's why it's in front of you today. Questions from council? Okay, I'll read the Councilor McLean.
Sorry for the late hand up. Just only the 3 southern townships have had any submission at this point. Is there a plan to increase that for Center Wellington and north of here?
I'm not sure. I'll get back to you on that, and I'll make sure I CC all council. I know the county is taking a leadership role on this, and but I'm not exactly sure if there's anything in the works right now for us and the other northern municipalities. I'll find out though. Dan, you don't know, do you?
I did have a quick conversation with Kenda Hart yesterday or a couple of days ago on this. He did say that they are initially focusing on the southern municipality because the impact on assessed value in the southern part of the county would be a lot higher. But it was more of a resourcing and cost issue at this point, and they may look at expanding this later on once they get going on this.
Mr. McLean, following?
Just curious, what are they asking the province or MPAC to reassess? What level are they asking to reassess them at a tier 1 farmland, or are they going for industrial, which they should be?
The primary recommendation at this point is to create a brand new assessment type, similar to what was done in 2015 with landfill sites. So they're going after that, and it seems like there's a little bit of traction on assessing them as a completely different land use. So that's where we've had most of our conversations with the ministry at this point. Okay, I'll read the recommendation. That the Council of the Township of Center Wellington supports the top aggregate producing municipalities of Ontario resolution with respect to property tax assessment for aggregate resource properties as outlined in the Wellington County Administration, Finance, and Human Resources Committee report dated September 15th, 2020, and provided to Council in report COR 2020-53 dated September 21st, 2020. Mover for that recommendation? Councillor McElwain, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to the Fergus Wastewater Treatment Plant Secondary Digester Roof Replacement. So, based on our pre-budget meeting, Council had requested that staff bring more information on this project, more detailed financial and functional information on this project. And so this is why this is in front of us right now with that additional information. And I know we have a team who has come to speak to this. I know that Colin is here, Dino's here, Stephanie's here. Also, Mike from Jacobs is here. So it's going to be a bit of a tag team effort from this group. And I'm going to turn it over to Colin to quarterback this. So Colin, however you want to, what the order of speakers should be, it's up to you, okay? Turn it over to you at this point.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mayor Linton. Members of council, good afternoon. Just want to provide a brief introduction, and as Mayor Linton mentioned, we're going to tag team some remarks on the Fergus Wastewater Treatment Plant Secondary Digester Roof Replacement Project. And so as Mayor Linton mentioned at the budget meeting on September 8th, council passed the following motion, and I'm just going to read it word for word, if that's all right. So that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington direct staff to provide additional information with respect to the Fergus Wastewater Treatment Plant Secondary Digester Roof Replacement, and in particular, number one, the analysis weighing of the evaluation criteria, that being technical, operation, and economics, and two, the review of the secondary digester roof alternatives and factors used, including compatibility with existing systems, approval needs in terms of environmental compliance approval, track record in the industry for secondary digesters, and capital and operating costs, all for the September 21st Committee of the Whole meeting, and that is today. So the purpose of this report is to present that additional information, and we do have a recommendation for council to consider that council authorized staff to move forward with the preferred alternative for the secondary digester roof replacement, being a stainless steel floating roof, and also that additional funding be provided through the 2021 capital budget. And so our order of comments and presentation to introduce this report, we're going to start with Stephanie Rossi, who's project managing this on behalf of the township. Stephanie will provide a bit of the timeline to refresh council's memory on the project and the issue that we're working to address at the wastewater plant. And then from there, we'll go to Mike Newbingen from Jacobs. And Mike has a brief presentation just to walk through some of the considerations. There's also three memos that form part of the decision-making process that are attached to those reports that Jacobs helped the township walk through in terms of selection of the preferred alternative for the roof replacement. And then we also have Dino Maziro, the manager of environmental services. Dino is just going to provide the operations perspective on the preferred alternative. So, and then after that, we'll open up for questions. So I think from there, I'll hand it off to Stephanie to provide some of the timeline and project background.
There we go. Just trying to unmute myself there. Thanks, Colin. So through you, Mayor Linton, to give everyone a little bit of background on the project timeline for the Fergus Wastewater Treatment Plant. The secondary digester was built in 1991, and it includes a 50-foot diameter or 15.3 meter floating fiberglass reinforced plastic roof. So that FRP roof is now almost 30 years old and is basically at the end of its service life. In 2015 and 2016, there were observations of potential loss of gas pressure and gas volume from the secondary digester, and that coupled with observations that they could actually hear gas escaping from some areas around the circumference of the digester roof led them to believe that there was gas leaking from the roof. So in order to investigate the probable gas leak, the secondary digester was emptied, cleaned, and inspected in September 2016. So at that time, it was determined that the roof was in fact leaking, and the inspection report, in order to address the roof leak, had the recommendation that we do a repair involving an epoxy or polyurethane type of sealant on the interior, on the inside of the digester skirt, and extending up above the joint where the skirt meets the roof dome by about a foot or 300 millimeters. So that repair went ahead, was completed as recommended in October 2016. And then the secondary digester went through a winter season. And then in March 2017, it was concluded that unfortunately that interior sealant repair had not been successful, and that gas was still leaking from the perimeter or circumference of the secondary digester roof. So at that time, some other options were investigated, including the idea of potentially doing an exterior sealant on the outside of the roof, or looking at replacing the existing FRP roof with a new roof, seeing as the roof was basically at the end of its service life, and the FRP material is really not commonly available anymore. And so we would then have to look at replacing the FRP roof with a different roof material type. So following up on that, in June 2018, Triton Engineering provided the township with some preliminary information on the various advantages and disadvantages of some different types of various digester roofs. The purpose of that preliminary information was to assist the township with budget pricing and estimates, looking to take this forward as a 2019 capital budget project. So attachment A in this report has that email from Triton, which is dated June 26, 2018, and that has the initial digester roof comparison information. At that time, Triton also provided some costing information from a manufacturer for the supply-only cost of some various different types of digester roofs. And that was to assist us with the initial budgeting process. So based on that initial supply costing in 2018, we saw at that time that the supply cost of a floating stainless steel roof was actually only $60,000 more than for a fixed stainless steel roof. So, you know, 60,000 was a relatively small portion of the overall project cost of this type of a roof replacement, being more in the ballpark of $2 million. And it is important to note that the roof supply price is just one portion of the much larger overall project cost. So that roof supply pricing did not include the following overall project costs, such as the removal and disposal of the existing FRP roof, the cost for engineering and roof design, the cost for renting a large crane to offload the roof sections upon delivery of these 50-foot diameter roof sections when they arrive at the treatment plant, the cost of assembling the roof and installing it on site, which would need an additional crane rental for a large crane to hoist these the 50-foot diameter roof pieces into place on the digester, the overall construction costs, which also include bonding and insurance, and the inspection, testing, commissioning, and certification of the digester once the new roof is installed, as well as overall contingency allowance. So following the preliminary information on the roof types and supply costs, township staff continued working with suppliers, getting budget estimates for the replacement roof, and preparing a capital project for the secondary digester roof replacement. And that was pegged to be part of the 2019 capital budget process. So that budget was approved by council in February 2019, and the Fergus Wastewater Treatment Plant digester roof replacement project was included in that process. In April 2019, the township then engaged Jacobs Consultants to keep proceeding ahead, and they reviewed the conditions and did an initial evaluation of roof replacement options for the secondary digester. That initial report was dated November 2019 and is included in attachment B to this report. So following that initial review, Jacobs then provided a further summary detailing their comprehensive roof evaluation analysis. That is included as attachment C and is Jacobs' letter dated May 4th, 2020. So that comprehensive analysis, that included looking at the life cycle costs as well as the operating costs and net present value costs, also the various technical criteria and operation requirements. So essentially, that further evaluation looked at 6 different digester roof types and compared those against 13 different evaluation criteria. The report then gave a comparative rating for each roof type and for each criteria. It also assigned importance ratings for each of the criteria that were evaluated. And then it tabulated the numerical scores for each of the roof types, came up with an overall score for each roof type, and was able to then conclude that a floating stainless steel digester roof had the highest and therefore best overall score and is the preferred recommended alternative. So following that comprehensive roof evaluation and the identification of the preferred alternative, township staff then continued progressing with the project by working with Jacobs to prepare a request for proposal for the overall project, which included the removal and disposal of the existing FRP roof, as well as the design, manufacturing, delivery, site assembly, installation, construction, testing, and commissioning of the new roof. So that RFP number 30-20 that was issued in June of this year and closed near the end of July. 3 submissions were received for that, and each submission was evaluated by the selection committee, which included representatives from Jacobs as well as representatives from the township who had been involved with the project. Each submission was reviewed and scored against the evaluation criteria that's fully outlined in the RFP document. And the committee recommended that the secondary digester roof replacement design build be awarded to Glover Hill because they had the best score through this evaluation process. Staff brought that recommendation to council at the August 24th council meeting this year, and that recommendation is included in attachment D to this report. The recommendation was defeated at that time. So subsequently to that, at the September 8th council meeting regarding the 2021 preliminary capital budget, council passed the motion that Colin read out at the beginning, and I'll just repeat that here. The motion being that the council of the Township of Center Wellington direct staff to provide additional information with respect to the Fergus Wastewater Treatment Plant secondary digester roof replacement, in particular that being 1, the analysis and weighing of the evaluation criteria, including the technical, operation, and economics, and 2, the review of the secondary digester roof alternatives and the factors used, those being including compatibility with existing systems, approval needs for the environmental compliance approval, the track record in the industry for secondary digesters, and capital and operating costs, and to bring that forwards for the September 21st Committee of the Whole meeting, which is today. So the purpose of this report is to present the additional information requested by Council regarding the identification of the preferred digester roof alternative for the Fergus Wastewater Treatment Plant Secondary Digester Roof Replacement Project. So at this point, I think I'll turn it over to Mike Newbegin. He's the project manager and project lead with Jacobs Consultants, and he's been involved in the whole evaluation process of the different digester roofs. And I'll turn it over to Mike now, and he can step us through the roof evaluation criteria, the scoring and rating process, and all of the advantages and disadvantages of the various different types of roofs. And also, I think he's going to outline what it could mean to the project if we do decide to switch to a fixed roof instead of a floating roof at this point. So with that, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. Appreciate that. If it's okay through the mayor, I would try and share my screen. I just have a few slides that I thought would help lead us through a discussion there on this. Just make sure this works. Share. So I hope everyone's seeing my introductory slide, the PowerPoint slide. Very good. So I will just walk through, as Stephanie indicated. I'll try not to reiterate some of the points she's already raised and focus on some more details there, just to try and provide some feedback on the information provided, a sort of condensed version of it. So really, my outline of my presentation, just the timeline in terms of some of the deliverables here, in terms of the reporting, and some of the key aspects of each. And there really was the three sort of reports. We had an evaluation report, as Stephanie indicated, in November 2019. We then just had a summary letter that well outlined sort of the evaluation criteria that was used, which took into account technical, operating, and economic aspects of the various roofs that were reviewed. And then as sort of a follow-up to the council meeting and some of the questions raised there, we had an additional letter here just dated a few days ago there with some additional information with a focus on sort of comparing floating gas holder roofs and fixed roofs. So I'll just move through that a little bit, just a little overview of the sort of reports there. In terms of the first report, the sometimes called initial report from November, this report we did a background review of the Fergus Wastewater Treatment Plant digestion process. We looked at the digester age, which Stephanie went through, in the history. We looked at the data, how the digesters were performing, the biosolids characteristics, performance, gas production, and also did sort of a literature review summary of the various types of roofs, floating gas holder, fixed roofs, membrane roofs, and different materials of construction, and the general characteristics and advantages and disadvantages of each on a general sense, not necessarily focused on Fergus. And then, as Stephanie indicated, we did do costing based on suppliers providing quotes for the physical roofs delivered to the site. We looked at what the capital cost would be, including the cost of the roof, but as well demolishing the existing roof, cleaning out the digester, fabricating the roof on the ground, coatings if required, paint coatings, installing that in place, and additional mechanical aspects in terming flare arrest valves and overpressure valves and a hut on top of the digester and connections, so that it was sort of a complete evaluation of the full project, as well as looked at O&M costs and net present value or life cycle costs, and then use that as part of the evaluation along with operations and technical aspects to evaluate the various roofs. So just as a very brief overview, this just shows what we're talking about when we're talking about a floating gas holder roof and a fixed roof. So these are simplified, but you can see in the floating gas holder roof, this roof can vary elevate its level, the level of the sludge, biosolids in the tank with the amount of sludge that's there, and also has an area for gas storage. And compared to the fixed roof, has more gas storage, hence a gas holder roof. But the level can go up and down, but it then will rest on corbels or supports that are located so the roof will not fall too far into the tank. On top of that, in terms of mixing, which is something that gets talked about, the ability to provide mixing in that secondary digester in the future, we were looking at sort of a mixing system that would be similar to your primary digester, the other digester at the site. And that mixing system, which includes sort of a generation mixing system, could be incorporated into either style of digester roof. So that just gives a brief overview of that. So the detailed evaluation is summarized well in that May 4th letter, as Stephanie indicated. We had the three main categories, these being technical, operational, economics, and overall there was 13 criteria that were used to evaluate the roofs based on those main categories. And overall, the floating gas holder roof scored high for availability. There are a number of suppliers that can provide this type of roof. The impact on that environmental compliance approval, or your ECA for your plant, that it would be that. And structural implications, because it would be a floating roof similar to the current, and flexibility of operations, because it would fit well into your current sludge handling as well as gas system in terms of using biogas to supplement with heat. A stainless steel roof scored high for specialized contractor requirements, because as stainless steel, there's no coatings required. You wouldn't have to put in any scaffolding in at different times to apply the new coating and ensure it was well laid out. Constructability worked well, and O&M costs were very good because recoating would not be required. And overall, the stainless steel floating gas holder roof did have a little higher initial capital cost depending on the supplier. Stephanie indicated the difference between a fixed stainless and a floating stainless steel roof was quite small, and it became even smaller once we included the other aspects of the project, and it had a nice lower O&M cost since coatings would not be needed to be reapplied, and hence a very attractive net present value. So overall, 13 criteria. I won't spend too much time on this, but 13 criteria. We did evaluate each of the 6 roof styles using the 13 criteria. That criteria was set ahead, as well as the weighting for each criteria. And then once that was agreed, that's how we were going to evaluate them. Each roof type was evaluated, and they were evaluated equally and scored, and the score from 0 to 4 was then weighted by the weighting we pre-agreed to, and the numbers were summed up for each type of roof, and I'll see on the next slide what the results were. But on the costing, just to reiterate a little bit what Stevie said, the important thing was that each roof quote was evaluated the same way, such that general services, clean out, demolition, removal of the existing roof, getting the roof to site delivered, fabricating it on the ground, welding it, applying coatings, adding the additional mechanical items are all included, as well as some commissioning, testing, and a contingency value. So they're all evaluated the same way. And that table, the whole evaluation table is in the council report. And from that, as you say, the recommendation was for stainless steel floating gas holder roof to replace the existing. And this just a different way of summarizing it than what's in the council report, just shows the scoring for each based on the category. Each category had a number of criteria. So blue being technical, orange being operations, and gray being economics. And adding those up with the weighting, we can see that the stainless steel floating gas holder roof did score better than the other 5 roofs that were evaluated. So based on that, I think that clearly sort of outlines the method that was used to evaluate everything. just following the council meeting, there was questions that sort of came out, and we wanted to sort of address those. So we've taken a look at those. And in that letter, we sort of wanted to summarize again, so what were the advantages, disadvantages for floating versus fixed roof for Fergus, for your treatment plan? And just ensure the economics for each roof were clear and how it was presented, and getting a few extra costs that are in the report from some recent costs or costs for different roofs to see that we were in line, and we feel we are. And the tender price that the township got was a very good one. And then some additional considerations, as Stephanie alluded to. What would be the implications if we went to a fixed roof? What extra needs would we want to consider? And what would that do for the project cost and the schedule? So I'll just summarize those briefly and then certainly be available for any questions. So overall for Fergus, we saw the advantages for a gas holder roof versus a fixed roof. So I haven't shown, the counter would be that these would be a disadvantage for a fixed roof, that the advantages of a floating gas roof for Fergus, it is the same operating strategy. You do have a floating roof now. The biogas storage helps. The same amount of gas is generated, whether it's fixed or floating, but the gas holder roof allows for extra gas to be stored such that when needed, it can be used in the boilers. If the volume's a little less, there's the potential you'd have to supplement with natural gas, which you do now, but we feel might increase. Obviously, if we have to burn off biogas because you can't use it like you are now, that's going to increase the greenhouse gases, so the floating roof would reduce that. It also allows for continued decanting and sludge thickening that you do in your secondary digester, which the level allows for thinner material to be taken off and returned because the roof can move up and down. Also, there's no environmental compliance approval amendment required. This would be under your current ECA. There's a flexible operating clause. You just have to sort of report. It's not an application. But if you go to a fixed roof, we would have to amend the ECA. And as a result of the roof moving up and down, the ability to keep a constant pressure is a lot easier. The one potential disadvantage, there is a slightly higher capital cost, but by the time we look at it installed, it becomes less, and on the net present value, it's very competitive. And that's what's seen here. Various costs, obviously stainless to stainless was very close. If we look at all the different materials, carbon steel as well, sometimes it could be as much as 15% or different suppliers. But as we look at it installed, that difference becomes a lot less between floating and fixed, in the order of 6 to 8%. And then for net present value, about 5, which within the accuracy of these estimates is basically the same number. We did get some comparative prices from Orangeville, Duffin Creek, and Highland Creek, and the Kitchener wastewater treatment plants for different roofs and different materials, and they seem very competitive. We saw that generally the cost of the roof alone can be in the order of $600,000 to $700,000, and then installed is often around the $2 million mark. But in particular, I think a very good example, because it's just being completed, is Orangeville, which is putting in a fixed carbon steel roof. It's a little smaller diameter, 13.7, I believe, compared to your 15.2 meter diameter digester. And it's 2.3 million with the mixers. It has mixers included, and you're at 1.9 for stainless steel floating roofs. So very competitive compared to that. The other item that I think maybe came out of the previous council meeting was, I believe that the price that may have been discussed was for a glass fused carbon steel fixed roof, which does have a lower capital cost potentially. But again, once we take their quote, the initial quote we got from them, we had to size it for the size of Fergus, and again include demolition, new valves, the hut on top, contingency, installation, and everything. Actually came up to about 1.5 million. They also provided a design build option, which we did look at, and again, it came in to a similar capital cost when we included everything. So cost a little less, yes. I don't believe as low as was discussed at the last council meeting when you included everything that I think is needed for Fergus. But it was evaluated with all the other roofs. You can see it in the table and in the council, the report that's made to council. And when we evaluate all the evaluation criteria, the stainless steel floating roof was the preferred solution. So just to wrap this up, sort of looking at what are those additional aspects that we want to consider if you went to a fixed roof. One is plant operations, and Dino will probably speak a bit more to this, but overall, we want to do some modifications for a fixed roof. There's a number of ways this could be done. Just in the short time frame that we've had between when we met last, we looked at a potential overflow structure. There'd be a cost for that to ensure that the fixed roof would sort of be easy to operate with the current system and would generally operate more at a fixed level. Therefore, that would need to be included, and that would have some impacts in terms of sludge storage because the level wouldn't vary much then in the secondary. You'd have to count on your sludge storage capacity you have, which can be an issue because agricultural land only requires your biosolids at periods during the year, and therefore you need that storage. The thickening capability would also be difficult to do in that revised secondary digester, and you'd probably have to just do it in your biosolid storage tanks, which again would provide a little less flexibility for the plant. The ECA amendment, that environmental compliance approval, we've talked about a few times. The aspects that are involved in that, one is the cost for the amendment. It's a 40-page application, has to be sent to the ministry. It's fairly detailed. There's a cost for a consultant like myself to undertake that for you. There's also a fee the ministry invokes of $2,000 for that. It also does open up your ECA to the ministry to have a look at. They can look at your ECA anytime, but my experience has been that this is the time that they do tend to look at things. And you do have in one aspect, which is a seasonal disinfection requirement, which is seen at other plants as well, but there are a lot of plants in the same sort of area, Southern Ontario, Grand River discharge area, that have year-round disinfection. And if that was imposed, that would be an extra cost in terms of energy and lamps for the township and for operations at that plant. There's also the time for the approval. Generally, it's about 6 to 8 months for that approval to go through. You really can't go ahead with the construction until that approval is met. And currently on their site, they're actually saying it's 12 months. And I'm assuming that's because of COVID. So when I have a schedule, I'll show in the next slide, we did base it on that just to be safe. But it could be shorter, but it still is a period of time. Lastly, biogas storage. I think as we saw, there's less storage there. So it's just going to be harder to make use of that biogas. I think you're going to end up flaring a bit more and buying more natural gas as a result of that. In terms of the engineering costs, obviously we can work with the township. We could go for a fixed roof. We would have to retender. There'd be redesign required for that. The amount of that would depend on how it's done. So we gave a range in the report. There'd be tendering. We'd want to review those submissions with yourselves to come up with your engineering group to come up with a preferred vendor for that, a contractor. Fixed roof, I think we really would want to do a structural analysis as well, because a fixed roof, unlike the floating, is going to sit on the walls at the top of the tank, and we want to make sure the tank can hold that weight, and that would need to be done. And I haven't really included the cost and time, obviously, for your township staff to participate in all that. Secondly, there's the schedule, and the schedule currently with the current recommendation for the stainless steel floating gas filter roof would have the secondary digester operational by the fall next year, October 2021. If we revise the tendering, we need to redesign, get the tender out, and we need to get that ECA approval, and that could move it at least a year and a half out. But given the best time to take biosolids out of your plant and go to agricultural land, I think that might actually slip out to the fall of 2023, so 2 years out. And I have just a slide that'll show that. So I just the two main slides, and then I will wrap up. This just looked at the costing to try and put it in perspective. Redesign tendering a recommendation. There's a range in the letter. All I did, I think it was between 30 and 90,000. I just took an average so we'd have a number to put in the table, 62,000. Potential roof modifications. This was that structure. It could be different, but just as a first cut in the time frame, the cost to design and construct that, we thought might be around 65,000. And the ECA amendment, this is just to submit it and pay the fee. So those items come out to 142,000. Those are, one-time costs. 4 and 5 are obviously estimates. This is based on if your ECA was amended and you had to disinfect year round. That's going to cost about $7,400 a year. Here I did it based on 20 years. It obviously comes out to be a larger number. If it was taken over, say, 8 years between sort of cleaning cycles of your digester, it would be around 60,000. Also, natural gas, again, a bit of an estimate because we're trying to determine what that impact might be. But as it says in the letter, if we looked at about 50% more natural gas being used because you haven't got the storage and you still need the gas, it would be about $11,000 a year. And if we prorate it for 20 years, a large value of 220,000. So about $500,000 overall that way. If we looked at 8 years, saying it could be less, could be around $300,000. But there is definitely a cost to move forward now with a fixed roof, and some 4 and 5 are considerations. They're not guarantees, but I think you want to be aware of those. And you can see that these prices are such that the difference between a floating gas holder and a fixed, really, any difference there could be, the 60,000 for the supplier that Stephanie noted, would be definitely used up. So that's the one point. The other one is just the schedule. And I apologize if this isn't really easy to see, but the lines are just meant, the top set is the original tender. It just shows how things are progressing. That this circle with the hazing on it is the ideal time for the digester clean out in the spring. So in April each year, that's the time where the most biosolids get hauled out from your plant. Hence, we'd be able to get up and going next fall, October 2021. If we re-tender, we're going to need some time to do that. I think this is pretty tight. We did put in the full 12 months for the ECA amendment, but I do note now that I've got you awarding it almost before that's done, and that's a bit risky. Usually you wait till you get the amendment in before you award. So I think this is reasonably accurate, not too conservative. But you can see that I would suggest the ideal time for that clean out time would be in the spring, and we're not able to meet that by this scenario. Instead, we'd end up having to do it in the late fall, early winter, which is not really ideal. So best case, we're looking at January 2023. But if the biosolids are such that we want to get the best time so we don't upset plant operations, that could extend into the fall of 2023. So that's the implications for going out for a fixed roof, both in terms of costs, in terms of the project schedule, just so it's clear. So with that, just the final slide. I apologize for the time this may have taken, but I think a thorough and defensible evaluation of the roof alternatives was undertaken. I think it was very comprehensive. It included cost, it included all the aspects of the cost, as well as other criteria, which were about determined ahead, weighted, and then applied. And so I think it was a good undertaking. Costing was very similar for the different roofs. And O&M and net present value considered, costs came in very close. The tendering, as Stephanie indicated, we got 3 submissions for that, so we got some interest. And comparing to the most recent fixed carbon steel roof at Orangeville, I think the tender price getting you a stainless steel floating roof is very competitive. Therefore, I would support the recommendation that the award be for a floating gas holder stainless steel roof for the Fergus treatment plant. So I appreciate that. Thank you for the opportunity to present this, and I'll pass this back. I'll stop sharing and pass it back to Colin, I believe.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mike. So we're just going to wrap up with some remarks by Dino, and then Dan's going to present some of the financial implications in the report. So Dino, I'll hand it off to you.
Hi, thanks, Colin. I'm going to keep brief and simple, and thank you, Mike and Stephanie. Those are great overviews. Through you, Mayor Linton, I simply want to confirm that operators and operations have been involved, and input has been considered throughout this whole process. We've discussed the outcome and of the assessment with the current operators, and I can confirm that we are in agreement that the stainless steel floating roof option is the best fit for operations. I just kind of wanted to confirm that with council, and I can turn it over to Dan.
Thanks, Dino. From a financial perspective, as council is aware, we had a pre-budget meeting not too long ago where a top-up to the digester roof project was included. As Stephanie mentioned, we have a 2019 budget for this project of $2 million. We know from both the Jacobs analysis and from recent procurement activity that the anticipated cost of a stainless steel floating roof is somewhere around $2.35 million, and that's in 2020 dollars. So if we're going to be looking at procuring this in 2021, we've included a top up of $500,000 to bring the total available budget up to $2.5 million, just simply because of the cost of going through the re-procurement process, as well as any inflationary impacts we see going from 2020 to 2021. So that is the linkage between the report discussed today and the pre-budget discussion we had not too long ago in early September.
Well, thank you very much, team. Colin, anything else to add, or is that good?
I think we're good. Yeah, I think we'd be happy to answer any questions council may have at this time.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure that I confirm for councils, we'll provide lots of opportunity for council questions and discussions on this one. We won't be rushing through anything. This is a really important project for us that needs to happen, so we want to make sure everybody's good with the nature of the answers that came out today, and appreciate from council that due diligence was taken on this project. I just make a comment to council that this is kind of the detail that goes into all the projects that we do, but it is good from time to time for us to see the nature of the work that our staff do on all these kinds of projects. Firstly, let's just go around and ask councillors if they have any questions of clarification from either our staff or from our consultant with regards to what they heard today. So we'll go around a few times, but the first one is really about questions of clarification on anything that you heard. Starting with Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor, and staff as well. That was a very, very fulsome and detailed report, and thank you, Mike, as well, for that excellent report. You know, I've raised this matter a number of times, and I know today, 3 meetings in, we finally have sufficient, complete information on this matter to make a good decision. And this is exactly what I was looking for back in August when I made a motion to have this information, which perplexes me that it was defeated. And here we are with indeed the very information I was looking for. I can't help, Mayor, but be dismayed that we were put in that position back in August to make a decision on a very important matter, and we did not have a fulsome report on it. So I'm thankful that we finally do, but I remain troubled that we were put in that position of making a decision without complete information. I have one question, Mayor, for Colin Baker, and Colin, it's really a simple question, and I really would like just a yes or a no answer here. Colin, my question is, Did you meet with members of your wastewater staff about 2 years ago and discuss a fixed roof option, the capital cost of which was 900,000 and something? Simple yes or no will suffice.
Just to clarify, our staff can answer however they'd like to answer. You don't have to direct staff to answer yes or no. We don't have that authority. There's some sort of dictatorship there. Do you want to answer that?
Appreciate that, Mayor Linton, and thank you for the question, Councillor Foster. So operations staff were involved throughout the whole process of analyzing the different roof types and selecting the preferred alternative. And I went through my emails, all my correspondence to see if there was anything presented back to me that flagged concern with the direction we were going. And in fact, with the operators, I found the exact opposite confirmation that we were headed in the right directions, and operations were supportive at the time. So that's the basis that we moved forward. And as Dino mentioned, our current operations are quite supportive of the selected technology, the floating stainless steel roof replacement that we've selected through the process.
A new question, Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for your answer, Colin. I believe that was a yes. I'm not sure. My second question is, if indeed you did meet and discuss this, why wasn't it included in the August report? A fulsome discussion of the proposal and the fixed option. It wasn't there. Why not?
I'm not sure if there's anything to answer. All the information is here today. The purpose of going around the room again is questions on the nature of this project. That's what we're providing councillors the opportunity to ask. So, Colin, if there's anything you want to add to that, go ahead. If there isn't, then that's fine too.
No.
Okay. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you. I have to say it was quite a detailed report, and there's a lot of information in there. It is amazing to see how the process adds up. I know that the cost of removing the old roof won't change and all that. I think that I'm thankful that we do take the long-term maintenance costs into consideration. I think that if we jumped into the cheapest option, we would definitely be wondering what happened partway down the road. Again, I'm thankful, I guess, that we could see that the work was done in the background. So thank you for the report. And one thing I can say is I don't think it would hurt that we receive these reports. We do trust staff, but in the future, it's not the worst thing in the world to include reports sometimes, just to jumpstart that we know everything's being done. But thank you again to everyone.
Councillor Mackling?
Thank you. Thanks to Colin and everybody involved with putting together this report. It is so much better to get all the information to make a decision like this. And thank you to Bob Foster for the good work he did and with his motion that ultimately ended up with this report. So that was due diligence on his part that got us to this point. I do have a couple of questions though about the finance part of it. I think, Dan, this is probably for you. You mentioned that, I believe that we're still at $2.35 million is the cost of the project. That hasn't changed since August. And the budget asked for 2.5 with some extra contingency built in there for, now you mentioned, I'm looking for where you said it here, but it was basically why don't I ask you, what was the reason that it went up to 2.5?
Yes, thanks for the question, Councillor McElwain. Through Mayor Linton, we put in a provision to go up to 2.5 for two reasons. One is the cost associated with bringing us through the procurement process again. And then the secondary piece was any inflationary impacts of delaying the project by a year. The 2.35 million was a good price as of now, 2020, but we don't know what is going to happen with the capital cost of a project like this going into 2021. So we're putting a provision of 2.5 million for this project for 2021, and any funds we do not use would to the wastewater capital reserve.
Councillor McElwain, follow on.
Thank you. So basically, we had to go through a procurement process again, and we had to wait until 2021 now because of the 1 month delay from getting a insubstantial report. Is that what you're telling us? Why can't we continue with this year? I mean, it was only a 1 month delay, and so I'm still questioning why we have to go through procurement process again and why we have to consider new prices for 2021.
Through Mayor Linton, sorry, just for clarification, Councillor McElwain, are you talking about a new procurement process now in 2020, or are you talking about the procurement process that we just recently went through?
I'm talking about the fact that we had a proposal in August. It's now 1 month later. So I'm assuming that the same proposal for procurement is valid today as it was a month ago. And so therefore I'm asking, why are we considering a new procurement process in 2021?
Through Mayor Linton, so you are correct. We do have a proposal that is currently unawarded, and that was the direction of council back in the August council meeting to not award the RFP. The RFP submission was set as irrevocable for, let's look it up here, just 1 second. 120 days, which means the prices are fixed for 120 days, which means technically that RFP is still open. The issue with that is that council's direction, at least at the time at the end of August, was not to award.
But you could continue today now, assuming that this new complete submission report is accepted today. You could go forward with the process that you already had with the proposal you already have. Is that correct?
Andy?
We would have to have council direction to proceed with that RFP. The existing RFP. Council, as Dan has clearly mentioned, council defeated the previous resolution, and so we would have to receive new direction from council.
But the motion today, the recommendation today is to continue with the proposal that was made in August. And if council moves for the staff to go forward with that motion today or that recommendation today, then there is no reason to go through another procurement process because the other one is valid for 120 days. Is that correct?
Dan?
Through Mayor Linton, from a procurement process, that is correct. We still are able to award that RFP as was suggested by staff at the end of August. I just think I would need direction from our clerk in terms of what that means in terms of going forward from a council procedural perspective.
mean, I think we talked about this already, and so they would, right now, you're seeing a recommendation that has this project in 2021 versus a year later, and that's the recommendation we have in front of us, and hence the additional costs. So we'd have to pose a different type of resolution in order to move this forward and still allow for the RFP process that we've undertaken already to be able to be used again. Is that correct, Dan?
Yes, that is correct. Just thinking, yeah, that the price is irrevocable. I think we would have to have discussions with the highest scored vendor in terms of timeline, because it is a little bit later on compared to the agreed to timeline in the RFP. But like I said, from a procurement perspective, the price set was irrevocable for 120 days, so we could move forward with that.
Okay, Councillor Kitchus. I'm just going to go away to roll first. Councillor Dunsmore. Councillor Kitchus?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank everyone for getting more fulsome reporting here, as we requested earlier in August. But I do have I have actually a lot of questions. And I'd like to first ask Dino and Colin, our primary digester and our secondary digester at the present time are fiberglass. And I'm wondering, number one, are we thinking of replacing our primary digester at any time soon? Has it shown deterioration, and when do you think that it could be replaced? And secondary, I was wondering why a fiberglass fixed secondary holder was not in any of the comparisons. Those are my questions now.
Yeah, and go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Linton. Councillor Kitchus, thanks for your questions. I'll maybe weigh in first, Dino, if that's all right, and if there's anything you want to add, I'll give you the opportunity after. So at this point, there's no plans to replace the primary digester roof at the Fergus Wastewater Treatment Plant. That may change. I think during the next clean out, we'll continue to inspect it and ensure that we've got the right timing on the replacement. But at this point, we don't have a project identified in the 10-year capital forecast to replace the primary digester roof. And in terms of the material being used, I think Stephanie mentioned this in her remarks. Fiberglass reinforced plastic is really no longer used for digester roofs, and it's probably because we're seeing end of service life after 30 years, where a steel product that is either coated or stainless, service life is 50 plus years, and so fiberglass digester roofs typically aren't being manufactured at this point. I know, Dino, if you want to add anything else to that.
No, thank you, Colin. Through you, Mayor Linton, that digester was cleaned out last year. We did do some maintenance on the roof, and there are no plans, just to confirm what Colin said.
Councillor Kitchus, follow on?
This is a question for Mike. Just right now, you had a slide that was put up, and it did the comparison for 3 different things. the initial cost, operations, and the economics or something like that. And in that slide, you had the fixed glass fused steel roof cover as one of the most expensive. Yet in your Jacobs report, page 89, in the conclusions, you say, the net present value analysis of these digester cover types show that the fixed glass fused steel cover is the most economically viable option. And then at the last of this whole thing, you say the glass fused steel roof also does not require periodic recoating and is the lower capital cost than the stainless steel option. So, like, that seems like a contradiction from your slide to what this report says. So can you clarify that for me?
Mike?
There, sorry, I was pushing the wrong button. Yes, through the mayor. It's a good point. When I looked at the costs, that I was presenting the difference, I tended to do them for similar materials, so fixed roof to a floating gas holder roof, stainless steel. I think we did indicate that glass infused had a lower capital cost, but once you include all the installed, it does come up closer. It doesn't need coating on the inside of the roof, but the outside is carbon steel, so there would have to be some recoating potential on it, although it's a less harsh environment, obviously, outside. So it is cheaper. So I think when we're using some of the comparisons, when Stephanie indicated a floating versus a fixed for the same material, we were using that as an example of the difference between the two for the same material, and it was quite close. There is no floating glass infused carbon steel roof, so we couldn't compare to it. But even though the cost was less for the gas fused, as in the report, the numbers haven't changed or anything. When we evaluated the other aspects of a fixed roof, the overall scoring was still much better for the floating stainless steel roof.
Councilor Kittredge, follow on.
In your report on, so it was for November, the initial one, you have advantages and disadvantages for floater digestive covers. And you have disadvantages of moderate glass liquid interface, allows scum and foam buildup, odor and scum foam available to escape through the perimeter of the cover, lower service life due to high exposure, and limits on mixing alternatives. And for the fixed roof cover, you only have one, which is the scum and foam buildup due to large gas interface, using up active volume. So you have as advantages, easy to retrofit, can be used for all mixing types, provides biogas storage. But then in your September 16th, you're saying that it doesn't provide the fixed roof. So I see a contradiction there. So how can they both be true?
The mayor, I apologize for that. Like, obviously, I think some of the wording, definitely a fixed roof does provide gas storage. It really should say provides limited gas storage. A floating gas holder roof does provide more. And really, both have a harsh environment. You are correct on the aspect of the liquid interface. And again, this initial report is sort of literature value, disadvantages, advantages for these type of roofs as a starting point. And obviously, Fergus has a lot of experience with a floating roof, and this issue has never been a problem at Fergus. So there hasn't been any sort of foaming or odor issues identified. Therefore, we sort of discounted that disadvantage. The other aspects are right, and I think because sometimes people differentiate between a floating roof and a floating gas holder roof, which is what we're recommending. I think that's the other aspect where that table doesn't emphasize the gas storage that's really available. So this was the first step, and it provided sort of the background from a historical standpoint, but then we looked very specifically at Fergus when we evaluated it. So I think that's what I would feed back to you on that.
Thanks, Mike. Follow on, Councilor Kittrus.
The criteria for the figure 1 of your report, was that the May addition to your report on in November? And in its scoring, it says the impact of the EA and the presence in industry of the glass fused one. It scored nothing there. But you say in the report that Ingersoll has 2 glass fused things, so it can't be that rare.
You, the mayor, to respond. Good question. I think Ingersoll only has 1, was my understanding, but that is the only one that I am aware of. There are no other digester roofs in Ontario with the glass fused carbon steel roof. So it is fairly rare, and therefore we scored it accordingly. The other roofs, stainless, carbon steel, floating and fixed, are very common. They're the most common applications.
So how many points was that because of prevalence on this scoring?
It would be scored from 0 to 4, and I must admit I don't know the weighting that we applied to it. I think it's in the report. For prevalence, we gave it a weighting of 3.
Councilor Dunsmore?
My question was actually similar to Kirk's. For Dan, this RFP that was turned down a month ago is still active and open, and as long as the company we were awarding it to hasn't filled another job, we can go ahead and approve that and get this thing back on schedule. Am I correct in that?
Mayor Linton, yes, that is correct. It's still open. We can still award that RFP. As I mentioned earlier, there may be a discussion around timing because a month has passed since original anticipated time of award, but we can definitely award based on the irrevocable period.
Follow up, if I could, Your Worship.
Yeah, follow up, Councilor Dunsmore.
And what process? We need council approval to do that. Can I put a motion on the floor that we bring that RFP proposal back and vote on it again and award it? Is that possible?
Yeah, anything's possible. What you do have to handle in your motion, though, is waiving our rules of procedure that require a 2/3 majority requirement on re-looking at a council decision that was already made. So you'd have to add that into your proposal and then follow up with the rest. So if you're interested in doing that, then we can...
I am prepared to do that. We still haven't heard from Councillor McCrae. So if I could be so kind as to let Councillor McCrae and McElwain, and Van Leeuwen wade in, and then I'll make that motion to waive procedure and put this back on the floor.
Okay. Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Mayor Linton, and thank you, Councillor Dunsmore, for allowing me an opportunity to say something. First of all, thank you to staff for providing us the additional information to make an informed decision. I think it's obvious to me that the staff and the consultant have done their due diligence in assessing adequately the preferred option, and I certainly support Councillor McElwain and Councillor Dunsmore in wanting to move forward with a motion to bring back the RFP from August and make it happen now rather than have any further delays.
Okay, so if we take, I have, I want to just say a couple things. I had a lot of my questions were answered already based on some of the questions from council. One of them was related to how much extra it would cost to do this in 2021, or potentially cost versus doing it now. So those questions have all been answered. I'm suggesting that we take a 2-minute break and have our clerk draft something up for Councillor Dunsmore to see if that suits what Councillor Dunsmore and Councillor McElwain were talking about, and then we can kind of go from there and go around the table one more time and get people's comments and thoughts about that. So are we okay? I don't want us to try to do this on the fly. There's a couple things that we have to do right with this one. So let's take a 2-minute recess and we'll come back to the table. Okay, are we all back? Council McElwain, you're back? Okay, good. Foster, okay, good. Okay, I'm looking at it. It looks like all council's back here. So I'm going to have our clerk read something that she put together here. And Councillor Dunsmore, and hopefully it's along the lines that Councillor Dunsmore and Councillor McElwain were thinking. So if it works, and I'll ask Councillor Dunsmore if he wants to move that. Carrie?
Okay, through Mayor Linton. That the Council of the Township of Central Wellington received for information report IS 2019 Fergus Wastewater Treatment Plant Secondary Digester Roof Comparison, and that the Council of the Township of Central Wellington, notwithstanding the rules of procedure, waives the giving of notice and 2/3 majority requirements to reconsider a council decision with respect to the request for proposal number 30-20 Fergus Wastewater Treatment Plant Secondary Digester Roof Replacement, and that council award request for proposal number 30-20 Fergus Waste Treatment Plant Secondary Digester Roof Replacement to Glover Hill Inc. at a total upset limit of $1.948 million, excluding contingency and HST, and that the funding for this project be revised as outlined in the report COR 2020-43 dated August 24th, 2020.
Councillor Dunsmore, could you move that?
So moved, Your Worship.
Can we get a seconder for that? Councillor McElwain? And I'll go around the room with any questions. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, with all due respect to my good friend, Councillor Dunsmore, that motion is out of order. Mayor, you yourself told us that any motions, there are only three kinds of motions: motions to refer, motions to defer, and motions to amend. So the motion is out of order. It's in breach of our procedural bylaw. It's none of those three things. Motion to refer, motion to defer, motion to amend are the only kinds of motions we can make with an existing agenda item. The motion is out of order, sir.
I'm trying to figure out where you're coming from with this one, Councillor Foster, because this is a motion that got moved and seconded, something that hasn't been on the floor yet. So this isn't we're not dealing with an existing motion. The motion was never tabled. This is a new motion that is on the floor regarding something that's already on the agenda. So that's it. There's no deferral because we didn't read another motion. So this is the only motion at this time that lives. So it's completely in. I'll just confirm from our clerk that what I'm saying is accurate.
Yes.
Okay, so she confirms that that is accurate.
Mayor, I wish.
Councillor Foster? Councillor Foster, what are you saying?
Thank you, Mayor. There we go. Mayor, you yourself told us in a previous meeting that only three kinds of motions are allowed on agenda items: motions to amend, motions to defer, motions to refer, and here we are changing tack. Which one is it, sir? We're going around in circles.
Councillor Foster, I thought I explained it, but I'll do so
No,
again.
you did not.
Okay. Are you listening? There was no motion on the floor. Councillor Dunsmore was the first time a motion was put on this agenda item. It is an agenda item that's on the table, and this was the first motion. So it's not in response to any other motion because we didn't table any other motion. So this is the only motion that's on the floor right now. It's completely associated with the agenda item that we're talking about, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with putting forward a motion like this with something that is on the agenda. Okay, moving on to Councillor Van Leeuwen. Any comments, any thoughts?
No, I have no further comments on this. I think we need to get on with this one.
Councillor McLean?
I seconded Neil's motion, so I'm in favor, obviously. But I did want to ask the question. It seemed to me like the recommendation that was brought forward by staff as part of the agenda captured the same basic concept, and so I wasn't even sure we needed that motion. I guess it's it seemed to move forward with the preferred alternative seems to be the same thing we're already saying. So it's just a question in wording. That's it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. The difference is it's changed in a year from 2021 to 2020, and it's changing that it's not just moving ahead with, but it's awarding. So it's a significantly more prescriptive recommendation. Councillor Mac?
Sorry, just the only thing, I guess, the only place that mentions 2021 is in the additional money in the 2021 budget. That's got to be there anyhow, just to cover the the over budget that was already presented. So the 2021 part of it really, that 2021 budget piece is still there, going to be there, I would think. So anyhow, as I say, I'm in favor of moving forward, whatever it takes. It's just, I was questioning why the wording had to be changed that way.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I was wondering if Carrie could repeat that motion. And I'm wondering, are we waiving the 2/3 on this motion?
I'll let her reread it, and the second question is clarified by her rereading.
Yes, through you. That the Council of the Township of Center Wellington received for information report IS 2020-19, and that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington, notwithstanding the rules of procedure, waives the giving of notice and 2/3 majority requirements to reconsider a council decision with respect to the request for proposal number 30-20, Fergus Wastewater Treatment Plant Secondary Digester Roof Replacement, and that Council award the request for proposal number 30-20, Fergus Waste Treatment Plant Secondary Digester Roof Replacement to Glover Hill Inc. at a total upset limit of $1.948 million, excluding contingency and HST, and that the funding for this project be revised as outlined in the report COR 2020-43 dated August 24th, 2020.
Councillor Dunsmore? Do you have anything else?
No, I was just going to mention to Councillor Foster, who was stuck on procedure, that the first part of this motion said notwithstanding the procedural bylaw is what gives us the right to put this forward. So I'd say we call the question.
So you just want to let Councillor McCray have one more chance to chat. Councillor McCray?
I believe we have a roof that needs to get fixed, so I'm fine with what's been suggested.
Thanks, Councillor McCray, and I'll call to question. All in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you very much, Council. And thanks to staff and our consultant for demonstrating due diligence on this project and for providing us this extra level of detail. Appreciated you coming in today, Mike, and all the work that you've done with our staff. And thanks to our staff team for being here and answering the questions and doing a good job on demonstrating your expertise in this field. Feel free to stick around for part lot control exemption bylaw, but if you don't want that exciting topic, then you're free to take off. Moving on to 6.6, part lot control exemption bylaw. Turn it over to Brett. Welcome, Brett.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This is a part lot control exemption bylaw that Council's seen many of these in the last couple of months. Just want to say that I did make an error in the resolution. I preferred in the resolution to block 80 when in fact it is block 88. Just want to clarify that. So this is a block of townhouses in Grandwood Phase 3, and the part law control exemption bylaw is needed so they can divide the block into the individual units to sell them. That's it.
Thanks, Brett. Questions from council on this one? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Question for Brett. Brett, I wondered if you can help me understand something. And I was reading the amendments about the Greater Golden Horseshoe Growth Plan. Sorry, I'll just repeat that. I see the green box. Brett, I was reading the amendments to the Greater Golden Horseshoe Growth Plan from about a month ago, and I don't see any reference to it in your report here. And I wondered, Brett, has the growth plan changed with that regard? And this report doesn't really reference that amendment to the growth plan. Does this project conform to it?
Well, this is a block of townhouses that's in a subdivision that's already approved. So you wouldn't apply the growth plan to a development that already exists. New plans don't apply retroactively to something that's already approved.
Anything else from council on this one? Okay, I read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington give 3 readings to a bylaw to exempt Block 80 of Plan 61M-235 from the part lot control provisions of the Planning Act. Mover for that recommendation. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCray. All in favor? And that's carrying. Moving on to 6.7, zoning amendment application, RZ 11/19 450 Forfar Street in Fergus. Again, over to you, Brett.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This is a proposal to rezone 450 Forfar from R1 to R2 in order to allow a semi-detached dwelling unit. We've reviewed the application. It conforms to the provincial policy, the growth plan, and the township and the county OPs. Public meeting was held back on July 29th. It was one of our first virtual public meetings, and there were no objections. We've attached the applicant's planning report to it, which staff generally agree with. So we're ready to bring this zone change forward.
Thanks, Brett. Any questions from council on this one? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Watching for the green bar. There we go. Watching for the green signal. Thank you, Mayor. Brett, a similar question. You know, this proposal here is in an existing area, so it's not a new development. And we can't tell, Brett, from your report whether being an existing area and a heritage area potentially, does this conform to the amendment on August 28th? It's not in your report, whether it does or doesn't.
Well, the application was submitted before that new growth plan came into effect. But in any event, what hasn't changed are the intensification policies and the targets that are established in the growth plan, that we are to 20% of our new development in the urban areas and the built boundaries should be from intensification, and that's what this project will help achieve.
Thank you, Mayor. Brett, I was wondering about the criteria for this intensification. Isn't one of the criteria that you need public transit as a part of fulfilling that intensification? Because if you have intensification, but you don't have public transit, you're going to get streets filled with cars, like many cars. And so I'm wondering, is there any provision that there's necessary to have parking provisions allowed on the property?
Well, in terms of the transit aspect, I think that's reflected in the fact that different municipalities have different rates of intensification that are part of their target. So the more, the major urban areas, places like, you know, in the GTA, they have much, much higher intensification targets because they do have transit. In Wellington County, the argument was made that the county municipalities, because they don't have transit, deserve a lower intensification target. And so it's 20%. But intensification, regardless, is still required for us to consider as part of meeting our future growth requirement. Again, our target's 20%. In terms of the parking, our zoning bylaw requires one space per unit for most types of development. And when you add a semi, this divided into two halves, and each half is going to have one parking space in the driveway. That's what our zoning bylaw requires. The province has, in fact, made it easier to accommodate intensification by allowing now what's called tandem parking. So if you envisioned a house with a garage and then the driveway in front, a space in the garage and then a space in the driveway also counts towards the parking requirement. Whereas, so that kind of overrides our zoning bylaw and allows cars to be sort of stacked up in the driveway. That's a provincial change that we can't do anything about. But you're right, we are going to see, obviously, as intensification proceeds, more chances for more cars in these existing neighborhoods. The province has more or less told us you have to accommodate intensification. So we try to look at in the new neighborhoods, spacing the driveways out so that there's room for parking on the street. But the provincial rules have kind of overridden what our own zoning bylaw would say.
Thanks, Brett. Councillor Kittrus, follow on.
Thanks for that, Brett. So are you saying that in our growth, we have no possibilities of making any recommendations to modify the intensification to allow to mitigate this kind of parking sprawl, I would say, in these new neighborhoods, because the lots are so small. So is there nothing in the growth committee or anything that we can do to sort of stipulate like the size of the lot or anything like that?
Maybe provide incentives for people to use their garages for their cars?
Yeah, well, and it is going to be a huge challenge, and wouldn't want to say we can't do anything, but the latest change, for instance, to allow tandem parking where one car is parking behind the other is detrimental to the way our zoning bylaw itself was already set up for when people want to add an apartment to a house. And I guess the next time we rewrite our zoning regs, we may have to look at that, but the direction, at least from the province, is very clear that the province wants supply of housing. And so they've made the provincial regulations such that we're not supposed to do things like require more parking or require bigger lots that make it more difficult to get the supply. And so we are going to have a challenge that we'll have to think about when we update our zoning bylaw next time. How could we do things differently to try to mitigate some of those things that the province wants us to do?
Anything else from council on this one? Okay, I'll read the recommendation. That the Council of the Township of Center Wellington approve application RZ 11/19 and the necessary zoning bylaw amendment be given 3 readings. Mover for that? Councilor Dunsmore, seconded by Councilor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Moving on to 6.8, rezoning application, RZ 1018. Sticking with the Brett theme.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This is a 2-part zoning bylaw amendment, and it's in the BD Hollow subdivision in Northwest Fergus. I'll deal with one part of it first. If you look at the map that's on page 147, it refers to parcel 1 and parcel 2. So I'll talk about parcel 1 first of all. Parcel 1 is a block of land that the adjacent church put on the market. They decided that they didn't need the land, so they made a sale agreement to Keating Construction. Keating acquired the land. It was divided by severance, and then subsequently the draft plan of subdivision for Beatty Hollow was modified to include that parcel of land, and Keating wishes to build townhouses on it. That was apparent through all the circulation. So they've now, one part of this zoning amendment is to change the zoning of that block to R3 so that townhouses will be allowed. It would be a clustered town with an internal private road and townhouses on the other side. I think there's a picture of the basic site plan in the planning report that's attached. And then parcel 2 are a couple of, this is kind of a housekeeping matter, a couple of blocks that were originally set aside in the draft plan at the time, we did not have a draft plan for the Sorbera development adjacent. So we weren't really sure we were going to have a dead end at the end of the street to accommodate. So we took a couple of blocks were set aside in case they needed to be used by the township as a secondary means of access. So fast forward to the last couple of years and Keating proceeding with this last stretch of Beatty Hollow that's Rhea Drive. And we've concluded that because Farley Road goes through, because the Sorbera development, we no longer need the township to own those blocks. And so the proposal here is to rezone them so that they have the same zoning as what's adjacent in the subdivision. So one part of parcel 2 would be rezoned to R3 because it's adjacent to an existing townhouse block on Rhea Drive. And then the other part of that block would be rezoned to R4 because it's adjacent to an apartment block that exists on Farley Road within the Beatty Hollow subdivision already. We had a public meeting on this one way back in January. In fact, there's been no objections raised. So it got held up by COVID and not being able to process zoning amendments for a brief period of time. We're still catching up to that. So we're bringing forward this zone change now.
Thank you, Brett. Questions from council on this one? Okay, I'll read the recommendation. That the Council of the Township of Center Wellington approve application RZ 10/19 and the necessary zoning bylaw amendment be given 3 readings. Move for that recommendation. Councilor McCray, seconded by Councilor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Moving on to 6.9, subdivision agreement phase 2A of Storybrook. Over to you, Brett.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Sorbera Tribute Nigus Holdings, they're the developer of the subdivision that's called Storybrook. And as you know, what we called phase 1 is in the ground and under construction. The houses are being built there at a pretty good pace, and Storybrook or Sorbera is ready to move ahead with phase 2, or the first part of phase 2. They're calling it phase 2A. It's a segment of the phase 2 that was approved by LPAT back in November of 2018. It's largely an extension of existing roads that were already built as part of phase 1. So Elliott Avenue gets extended, Das Drive, Harpin Way, and Spicer Street, they all get extended. The Farley Road gets completed, and so there's frontage for the park block and the sewage pumping station and the townhouse block that was in phase 1 as a result of this as well. And there are 2 park blocks that are adjacent to the stormwater management area and the wetland that are in this phase as well. The subdivision agreement itself is our typical subdivision agreement model. The developer's ready to go. They've been actively selling units for this phase for a few months now, and the sales are going pretty well. They have their environmental compliance approval from the Ministry of Environment to continue on with the extension of the sewers. And so they're ready to go ahead. There's 297 units in the plan, 267 units in this phase, 152 single detached dwellings and 115 townhouse dwellings. And the 2 open space blocks total about 1.5 hectares. That's it.
Thanks, Brett. Questions, comments from council? Councilor Kitchus?
Thanks, Mayor. I have a question for Brett. I have it's related to this because it's a development that's going forward. But in Summerfields, it's sold out. But I have a resident on a street of 6 houses that is the only person that owns their house. The rest are developers, speculators that have bought investments, housing. And now what has happened is they're applying for basement apartments. And so I'm wondering, is this going to be the trend that we allow here in Center Wellington, where a person buys in a subdivision and thinks they're in a neighborhood, but then they have somebody that is pushing where they're all basement apartment, everyone's a renter. And so therefore the parking is all over the street because the rentals, I think the lowest rentals for a basement apartment in Fergus is $1,500. And the high end for maybe a 2-bedroom is like $2,500 above ground. So like no one car without public transit would, they need 2 people working. So how are you going to solve this problem and going forward? And I'd also like to ask the second question for there's some counselors here on the growth committee, and I'm wondering, have they considered this problem on their committee?
So do you find the question there, Brett? I think there's need for rental properties, and we don't control who rents what here. So I don't know if you can respond to that. I mean, it's a trend right now that people are renting out parts. But go ahead.
Sure, I can try. I mean, I guess the challenge is, I think it's not a Center Wellington problem. It's a Greater Toronto area problem that everybody faces. We have a challenge that the province wants to increase the supply of housing, and they're passing rules about density that mean that our lots are getting smaller. the land values do a lot to dictate people can afford only smaller lots because the house on a bigger lot will be out of scale. So we are seeing a demand for people putting in apartments, and it's coming from I think two ways. If you want to buy that house and live in it yourself, you might need the income from an apartment in order to be able to make the monthly payments on the house. And then, as you say, Councillor Kittredge, there is a trend towards people buying properties for investment purposes. But we don't have any way of intervening, and zoning treats the land, not the owner. So whether someone is the owner of a house or a tenant in the house, the owner of the house still has the right to put in an apartment building if they comply with the regulations that we've set out. And as your previous question in one of the earlier reports, we now have the added challenge of this idea of tandem parking, where our zoning bylaw previously would have preferred that only lots of a certain size could have an apartment so that they could have a double wide driveway. Now the province has sort of defeated that by saying you can have tandem parking. So we're going to get apartments on even smaller lots. And I think that is something that we're going to have to work to adapt our zoning regulations for parking when the subdivisions come up. But again, we have adapted to looking at where we can get parking, where there are, because people are going to park on the street during the when it's not snow removal time regardless. So we're looking at making sure that there is places on the street where visitors or whatever are able to park. And I think one of the things, I guess, for higher density that the province has talked about that we may be able to use in the future, if the density is high enough, then the community benefits charge that Dan's talked about in some cases is now oriented towards higher density intensification, where we could use it to fund public parking. It's not going to work in a situation like this with Storybrook, where we're not, because the CBC is talking about 5-story buildings with at least 10 units in them. So it's not going to apply to this typical subdivision, but it will apply maybe in our urban areas where we might have higher density intensification. The parking on the street and all that with these units, it will be a challenge. People are going to park on the street. They're going to, like you say, we have multiple occupancies in houses now, whether it's from apartments or adult children who don't move out of the house as quickly as they used to. They need places to park, and the zoning standards have not caught up with that, and we're going to have to look at that. But I guess the hope going forward in the future, it's also in our strat plan to look at alternatives to private vehicle use, and those things are also coming in the community as well. More alternatives as we grow, as we collect trails. It may be more viable for some people in the future not to even own a car, and so hopefully the pace of change helps solve that problem too.
So Brad, just to follow up on the second part of that question, where do you anticipate the Healthy Growth Committee weighing in on providing some input in that area?
We've already had a discussion at the Healthy Growth Committee once about the bylaw on adding units to our existing zoning, and that'll come back to the committee in the next couple of months. So there's an opportunity there to talk about that issue a little more. But longer term, it may be a bigger picture discussion, because The challenge is in the marketplace, people still want to own their own home. And until we see a big shift towards, for example, when we shift towards apartment buildings, most of that parking is on site. And so there's that limited need for parking in the driveway kind of thing that impacts the streetscape. So other than that, it'll be whenever we update our sort of parent zoning bylaw regulations. But if we think the idea is that we're going to make lots bigger, if we make lots bigger, it means we're going to have to meet the density target. We'll have to accept more apartments and townhouses that somehow have their own parking. But I think the reality is the parking is a challenge even in those environments, and it spills over onto the adjacent streets. So I don't have a great answer. It's going to be a challenge, and it really is the way it is for now.
Any other questions from council? Okay, I read the recommendation of the Council of the Township of Center Wellington authorize the mayor and clerk to execute a subdivision agreement between the township and Sobera Tribute Nigas Holdings Incorporated in respective stage 2A of the draft plan of subdivision 23T-16003, and that the council authorize Sobera Tribute Nigas Holdings Incorporated to make application for minor variances to the approved zoning regulations pursuant to section 45, bracket 1.4 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990. Move for that recommendation. Councilor Dunsmore, second by Councilor McElwain. All in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Moving on to 6.10, Fergus Fire Station Sanitary Sewer Emergency Repairs. And I'll turn it over to Pat.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So in April of 2019, the fire station in Fergus experienced a blocked sewer pipe. So after more investigation, it was discovered that the washroom discharge was connected to the stormwater system, likely an error that happened back during construction. So emergency repair was required, which was not previously in the budget. So staff utilized the township's purchasing bylaw for emergency purchasing procedures. And as part of that procedure, a report comes to council once the work is completed. And so the total cost of those repairs was $23,157, and that was funded from general capital reserves. So I'm just bringing this report as an information item to council.
Thank you, Pat. Questions from council? Councilor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Question for Pat. So Pat, if I'm understanding this, it is probable then that back when the fire hall was constructed, they connected the sanitary right to the storm sewer? Is that correct?
I wasn't here at the time, so would it have either been when it was constructed or when it was renovated? CAO Goldie may be able to comment on when that particular construction may have happened, but yes, that is exactly what had happened during construction. And it wasn't realized until 2019 when they had an overflow and a backflow from a blocked sewer.
So we're talking about something that potentially happened 2005 or 2006. Councilor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. That fire hall was built in, I believe, 1991 or perhaps late 80s. And at that time, it was well known that you didn't connect your toilet to a storm sewer. My question for CAO Andy is, we mentioned compliance on the environmental side with the previous matter. Is it recourse to the builder of that fire hall? That's a serious matter to connect the toilets straight into the river like that. Should there not be some recourse for that? In the late 80s and early 90s, we knew better.
Apparently somebody didn't.
Through you, Mayor Linton, as regards to going after for some recourse, actually trying to find the contractor that maybe have been building the builder at that time, as well as I think you would have a statute of limitations of how long that would proceed. And trying to identify whether that was done by the contractor of the 80s, the original building, or the addition, would be probably very hard to prove in short.
Thank you, Mayor. Does the fire station have backflow in their line? Because it's required by, that was legislation that was required, and all facilities have to, that are in industrial area have to comply with that. So I was just wondering, does it have that? And like, wouldn't that have been found at that time?
Through you, Mayor Minton, my recollection is backflows are for water, and that's what we have in our buildings is for water supply, not for sewage, and therefore it would not have been caught through that opportunity.
Okay, I'll read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington receives information and report on emergency sanitary sewer line repairs at the Fergus Fire Station in 2019 and 2020. Move for that recommendation, Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And that's carried. Okay, so we have section 7 has information items. There are 5 items there, and council has them. If they're had a chance to go through those, and just open it up for questions on any of those 5. Councilor Kitchen.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few questions here. Item 5, it says the purchasing bylaw review. It says it's expected completion by 2020. In a previous report, it said that the procedural bylaw will be coming as a draft. Will there be a draft for that one also?
So you want to know if purchasing bylaw is going to come as a draft? Just
Sorry,
because.
yes.
Yes. I just want to verify that the procedures bylaw is coming as a draft. I didn't. Is the procedures bylaw coming for a draft? Everything that comes to council is always a draft. So it's always amendable. So I don't see that. I didn't think there's going to be any difference in how anything comes to council. I didn't think the procedures bylaw was an exception to that rule. Am I right on that, Carrie?
Yes, through you, Mayor Litton, everything that comes to council is either a recommendation that is amendable, or every document, every bylaw could certainly be amended by council at any time.
Thank you, Mayor. In theory, yes, that's true, but some reports and some bylaws come at drafts, and it says draft on it, and others, they just come and they can be amendable. So I'm just wondering, is the procedural bylaw going to become as a draft and stay draft on it, and the procurement one going to be a draft and say draft on it, or is it just going to become as usual and then have amendments to it? That's what I'm asking.
Both will be coming to council without the word draft on it. and will come in all like our other things come, and then council will be able to debate and amend as we see fit. Any other questions from council on those 5 information items? Council McElwain?
Thank you. Just, it's a suggestion only. For the tracking list, can we add the report on the needs requirement for an operations center? It was supposed to be here a year ago, so I'd like to get it on the tracking list to make sure we get it before this year's budget.
If council recalls the pre-budget that we presented September 8th, I believe, did not include, we have deferred the operations center to 2022, 23. And so staff are, it's one of the things that's gone on the back burner a bit, but staff will be bringing forward a report before any additional funding is approved by council.
I think we just have to be, we have to talk a little bit about the tracking sheet. This could be really, really long with all the things that we actually have to bring to council. So I'm not always 100% sure what goes on this and what doesn't go on it, because everything that's going to be budgeted for is a potential action, right? So I think the purpose behind the tracking sheet was kind of those one-off things that we wanted to make sure that didn't fall through the cracks. But big things, say like an operations center, we haven't in the past included those things because those are things that are going to come up in another forum anyway. So I think kind of that's why we established this. But I do think it is important to track some of these things that otherwise might fall through the cracks. Anything else from council on these 5 items? Councilor Kitchus?
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 9, the municipal building audit update. Is that with the needs assessment report, or is that a different report? That's number 1. And just to follow up on Councillor McElwain's request for the needs, that needs assessment report was in 2019. It was given, the tender was given, it was filled out. We were supposed to get it in October, and then we're supposed to get it in November before the budget for the 2020. And now it said it was going to be deferred to April. We had COVID. So when is that going to happen? That was supposed to be given before the capital for the plans for the operational, whether we even needed it. So I'm just wondering about that. And when is that going to be on that tracking list?
I can't validate the time frame that you gave me because that's not how I remember it. But, is there anything that you'd like to respond to that question, Andy?
Yes, just as my previous comment, staff are now getting back to working on that report. Staff will be bringing a report forward, and no additional funding will be identified in 2021 for that project until council's seen the feasibility study.
Anything else from council? Councilor Kitchus?
Thank you, Mayor. Item 42. I'm a little confused. They have the cost on this Jack R. McDonald pedestrian bridge as the expenditures as $2,666,372, but then it has pier rehab and bridge lighting and it actually, it adds only, it doesn't add to the total cost over and under. So I don't understand how that lowers the total cost. Can you explain that?
Dan?
Through Mayor Linton, the calculation of the over-under column is looking at over-under with respect to budget. So it's looking at the actuals in relationship to the budget column. So for the pier rehab and bridge lighting project, it's comparing the $50,000 spent to the $600,000 budget. So that's just indicating that we're, from an invoicing perspective, we've only received early invoices for that project, and we have more to bring in.
Thanks, Dan. Councilor Kittrus?
I'm just trying to understand that project. Because it doesn't seem to, in none of the columns does it give you like a total cost and what it would be, even when the invoices come in. So it would seem to me that it would be, the expenditures are $262,666,000 plus the 600. So it's like $3.2 million. But you have there, and nowhere under these columns that would be the actual cost. So it just doesn't seem to be very clear, because you've divided all these, that's going to be the eventual cost. So can you clarify why that isn't like that? Like,
Ed?
Through Mayor Linton, this one's a little bit different because a lot of the funding for this project happened outside of the budget process. So normally you could look at the budget column and see approximately what we think the project will cost at the end of the day. This is a status report of the project as of July 31st, and as of July 31st of this year, we've only received approximately 50,000 in invoices for the pier work. So, like I said, in most cases, you can look at the total anticipated budget or the total budget and think that's close to the anticipated cost, but this one is a little bit different. I understand what Councillor Kittrus is saying, but it is a unique situation.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. I may have missed something on the matrix of projects, but I have a question, I think, for Dan. Dan, my question is about replacing the floor in the Elora Community Center. That's been on our agenda, I think, for this winter, or perhaps it's 2021. First of all, Dan, can you just confirm that for me? I couldn't find it on the list. Maybe I just missed it. Then I have a supplementary question.
Yeah.
Through Mayor Linton, the replacement of the ice floor at the Elora Community Center is showing as a 2021 draft project. So it's included in preliminary discussions for the 2021 capital budget. What you see in this status report are only projects that have been approved by council. So we haven't got to the point yet where the Elora Community Center roof has been approved as part of a budget and is part of this type of reporting. So that will go through the 2021 budget process.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very concerned about junior lacrosse in Elora. In 2020, the OLA canceled it, so that means the Mohawks did not play.
Sorry, Councillor Foster, what does this have to do with capital projects?
I'm getting to that, sir.
Are you? Okay.
So,
thanks.
What I'm What I'm getting at, Mayor, is that in 2020 there was no lacrosse, and now we're proposing potentially tear out the floor in 2021, and that's going to throw the Mohawks out of their own building potentially. And I'm wondering first of all, with the decline of hockey in the upcoming year, perhaps we can close the ECC this winter and consider at least doing the work on the floor this year so that it's long done by May of 2021 so that the Mohawks are able to play in their own arena. So the two things intersect there at that point, and that's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, sorry, this is a project capital status update. This is about projects that are already been scheduled. So I don't see where that falls into this category. And we're definitely not going to have a discussion about what goes in and what comes out of a project. That's budgeting discussions that we'll be having, not when it's an information item about projects that are currently underway. So there's no question there. Any other questions from staff on this one? Councilor Kitchus?
I have questions from 166 to 177. I'd like to start with 176 and 177. And I'm wondering, the urban design guidelines, they have 2012, 2015, the budget year. We've spent $31,000 on it. I know that it's been used for all the economic development applications, and it's been used for the bridge designs and all that. Yet we've never had a completed guideline. So when is that going to actually happen?
I don't know is that a question to, who's that a question to? Brett?
To Brett.
I'll do my best. Well, we have been working with those guidelines, as you say, in draft to evaluate the facade programs. The Healthy Growth have been through a round of looking at the design guidelines overall. And the council strat plan talks about bringing forward facade improvement guidelines. So the discussion, we haven't had a Healthy Growth meeting for a while, like most of our other advisory committees, but I think we have some specific direction through the council strat plan to bring forward the facade improvement type guidelines that we've been using specifically to get approved by council. The Healthy Growth Committee, when they reviewed them, I would say they're looking at more of the subdivision level kind of stuff that we may have to treat separately because they're also concerned about how to implement it. So there's other tools that we've looked at. We engaged a consultant to give us some advice, and there was a discussion at the Healthy Growth Committee that it's kind of parked there. So once we get back to the Healthy Growth meeting, resurrecting, we'll get this back on the agenda. I have some recommendations about how I think we can deal with the sort of implementation part of it, and that I'll be bringing those forward through Healthy Growth.
Councilor Kitchus?
I've read the urban design guidelines, and I've read the drafts. There's one that we got a draft for, not a complete report that we voted on, because we've never voted on the urban design guidelines, yet we're using them. So how is that possible under legal things? Like, we're using these criteria, but we haven't passed anything for it.
Well, design guidelines, I guess they're applied by staff, and the staff, things that staff are directed to approve. So from from a legal point of view, design guidelines in and of themselves, there's nowhere that they're recognized in the Planning Act or anywhere else. So that's part of the discussion that's taken place at the Healthy Growth Committee. We want to make sure that when they come forward, there's an implementation to go with it. And the implementation on the facade design guidelines is our CIP, that when we review the applications that are approved by staff, we're using the design guidelines. Site plan approval, we're using the design guidelines. That's an authority that's delegated to staff. But the conversation at the Healthy Growth on sort of the bigger picture was, how do we apply these in a more overall comprehensive scope that they might apply to future subdivisions and things like that as well. So we have to come up with the right implementation tool to go along with it. So that's where that side of the Healthy Growth discussion is going. And I do have a plan that we're bringing forward with the ability to implement it at the same time. So that's what we'll bring forward to Healthy Growth.
Okay, anything else from any other members of council? I think we're kind of talking about some of these projects, and really it's just meant to be a financial update to provide information on where the money is. Anything else from council? Councilor Kitchus, one last comment.
It has on here the official plan review, and it was budgeted in 2009. We haven't used very much of it. And I'm wondering, when are we going to be using that? And how does that affect the Rural and Cultural Heritage Landscape Registry, which is just recently under the budget item here? That's for Brett.
So we did budget for our official plan review way back when you mentioned 2009 or 2010. We haven't spent all of the money. We've spent some of it. It would have been set aside to use for consultants if we needed them to do certain specific things. However, as the provincial government has changed policy, what we've seen is a number of updates have taken place to the county OP, and things that we included that we might have spent money on ourselves, like natural heritage, have been done by the county. So we haven't needed to spend money on the same thing that the county's already doing. We've also had a succession of different provincial policy changes that we've had to incorporate, again, that the county took the lead on. For example, the source water stuff that Kyle talked about earlier today, all the water protection things, they all ended up in the county OP. We had a period of time from 2015 onwards where the province was talking about making changes to the growth plan that would have doubled our density target. And so not knowing what our density target and our intensification target would be, we weren't able to proceed with our own OP review. And the government changed, and now the growth plan's different again. And the county is doing their comprehensive review. It has to be done by 2022. So the note that's on there that we're working kind of hand in hand with the county is the reason why we're when the county ramps up the county policy review, we intend to look at our OP simultaneously with that exercise. And one of the recommendations within the efficiency study that was done is that the local municipalities consider making use only of the county's OP. Because it has been written in such a way, and Center Wellington Erin are the only two municipalities that have their own OP. So that's something, as the county works its way forward, we'll have to consider, because there's definitely efficiencies to be had by not having overlapping official plans. When it comes to the, you asked about the Rural and Cultural Heritage Landscape Study, that's a separate study. It's been funded on its own. We didn't use the OP money for that. And when it's done, there will be recommendations that come out of that that may require additional funding. And we're looking at a plan to integrate that into the future 10-year capital forecast. But it's not likely that we'll go back. Eventually, we'll have to make a decision if we go with only using the county OP, then this money can get absorbed back into the capital budget.
Okay, we're just a reminder. This is capital project status, so that's why it's authored by Mark and not by any of the department heads, because we're just talking about the status. So we're not going to get into any more about the pros and cons of each of the projects. That's not the intent behind providing this information. So with that, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Van Leeuwen, seconded by Councillor Kittredge. All in favor? And we're adjourned. Have a great rest of the night. Thanks for coming out. See you later, Councillor Dunsmore. Good luck in the last 5 days. Keep looking after that knee.